Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Ashford, but everyone calls me Tom. I've been a park ranger here in the Monongahela National Forest for 18 years now. People always ask me why I left coal mining to work in the woods. Truth is, after my daddy died in that mine collapse back in '73, I couldn't stand being underground anymore. Funny how life works out. I'm what they call a cave rescue specialist. Sounds fancy, but really it just means when some college kids get lost spelunking, I'm the guy who goes down to find them. I've pulled more than 200 people out of these limestone caves over the years. Black bears, timber rattlers, hypothermia, broken bones, I've seen it all. What I hadn't seen, until October 23, 1978, was something that made me question everything I thought I knew about these mountains. That morning started like any other. Early frost had painted the rhododendron leaves silver, and a thick fog was rolling in from up north. Canadian cold front, the radio said. I was checking my gear. 9mm dynamic rope, figure 8 descender, carbide lamp, emergency oxygen, when the call came in. "Tom, we got 3 cavers overdue from Hellhole Cave," Sheriff Roy Daniels said through the static. "Virginia Tech students. Been missing 18 hours now." Hellhole Cave sits deep in Blackwater Canyon, about as isolated as you can get in these parts. 35 miles from the nearest hospital, and the radio goes dead in them valley pockets. The cave itself drops down through the Greenbrier limestone for over 300 feet. It's not the worst cave system we got, but it's got its tricks. I radioed my partner, Dale Murphy. "Dale, you copy? Got a rescue at Hellhole." "Copy that, Tom. Meet you at the trailhead in 20. Dale's a good man. Been working these mountains almost as long as me. If there's anyone you want watching your back in a cave rescue, it's Dale Murph. He knows the underground river systems better than most fish. The hike down to Hellhole takes about 40 minutes through thick mountain laurel and ancient hemlocks. The whole way down, something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just different. The woods were too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrels chattering, not even the buzz of insects. Even Dale noticed it. "Quiet as a graveyard out here," he muttered, adjusting his pack. "Maybe the cold front spooked the critters," I said, but I didn't believe it myself. When we reached the cave entrance, that's when things got really strange. The cavers' equipment was scattered all around, backpacks, ropes, even their permits, but there was no sign of struggle. It looked like they'd just left everything and walked into the cave. "This don't make sense," Dale said, kneeling by a scattered pile of climbing gear. "Look at this rope. It's been cut, not frayed. Cut clean with something sharp." I picked up one of the backpacks. It belonged to Patricia Wells, according to the ID tag, a geology professor, 38 years old. The pack was still full of food and water. Why would they leave their supplies? That's when I first heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. It started low, almost like a moan, then climbed higher and higher until it became a scream. Not human. Couldn't be human. It had 3 parts to it, like an animal in pain, then something angry, then something that sounded almost laughing. The scream echoed up from deep in the cave system, bouncing off the limestone walls until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Dale went white as a sheet. "What in God's name was that?" he whispered. I'd heard plenty of animals in these woods. Black bears sound scary when they're mad, and a bobcat's scream can raise the hair on your neck. But this was different. This was something I'd never heard before, and in 18 years of ranger work, that's saying something. "Probably just the wind through the cave passages," I said, but my voice cracked a little. "Sound gets twisted around down there." Dale checked his radio. Nothing but static and a strange rhythmic breathing sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He shook the radio and tried again. Same thing. "Radio's picking up interference," he said. "Probably from that cold front." But I was looking at my compass, and the needle was spinning like a pinwheel. That's when I started to remember the old stories. Cherokee legends about something called the Yahyahash, the hairy giant that screams like the devil himself. Old Jimmy Crowfeather down at the general store used to tell those tales, but I'd always figured they were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. Standing there at the mouth of Hellhole Cave, with that impossible scream echoing from the depths and my compass spinning wild, those old stories didn't seem so silly anymore. "We need to call for backup," Dale said, but I was already checking my rappelling gear. "3 people are down there, Dale. Could be hurt, could be trapped. We can't wait for backup." Truth was, backup would take 4 hours to get here, and if those college kids were injured, they might not have 4 hours. That's what I told myself anyway. Looking back, I think I was just too proud to admit I was scared. The entrance to Hellhole Cave is tight, just a crack in the limestone about 3 feet wide. You have to squeeze through sideways, then drop down about 20 feet to the first chamber. The carbide lamp on my helmet threw dancing shadows on the wet walls as I rappelled down. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Caves always smell musty, like wet earth and old stone, but this was different. Mixed in with the normal cave smell was something else, something that reminded me of roadkill that's been sitting in the sun too long. Sweet and rotten and wrong. "Jesus, what died down here?" Dale called from above. The first chamber of Hellhole is about the size of a school gymnasium. Flowstone formations hang from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, and there's usually the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. But not today. Today the cave was silent as a tomb. I played my lamp beam around the chamber, looking for any sign of the missing cavers. That's when I saw the handprints. They were pressed into the mud along the cave wall, but they were all wrong. Too big, maybe 18 inches from palm to fingertip. And the fingers ended in what looked like claw marks gouged right into the solid limestone. "Dale, you need to see this," I called up. "What you got?" "Tracks, but they ain't human." Dale rappelled down and took one look at those handprints. His face went gray. "Tom, those are bear tracks. Gotta be. Black bear got confused, wandered into the cave." But I'd seen plenty of bear tracks, and bears don't have fingers. These prints had 5 distinct digits, with what looked like claws at the end. And the size, I've never seen a bear with paws that big. We followed the tracks deeper into the cave system. The passage narrowed as we went, forcing us to crawl on our hands and knees through sections barely wide enough for a man. The smell got stronger the deeper we went, and my lamp kept flickering for no reason I could figure. That's when we found the first piece of real evidence. Patricia Wells's helmet, cracked right down the middle, sitting in a pile of loose rocks about 50 feet down the main passage. But here's the thing. It was wedged into a crack in the ceiling, 20 feet above the cave floor. No way a person could reach that high, even with climbing gear. "How the hell did that get up there?" Dale whispered. Before I could answer, we heard it again. That 3-part scream, but closer now. Much closer. It seemed to come from all around us, echoing off the cave walls until the sound felt like it was inside my head. And then we heard something else. A voice, weak and scared, calling for help. "Down here, please, I can't move." We followed the voice, deeper into the cave, past formations I'd never seen before despite knowing this system for years. Strange flowstone shapes that looked almost like faces in the lamplight. The voice led us to a narrow chamber about the size of a closet, and there we found Patricia Wells. She was alive, but barely. Pressed back against the far wall, her eyes wide and staring at something we couldn't see. She was whispering the same thing over and over. The screaming giant with burning eyes. "Dr. Wells, it's okay," I said, moving slowly toward her. "We're park rangers. We're here to get you out." But when I got close enough to check her for injuries, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Her clothes were shredded, like she'd been clawed by something with razor-sharp talons. And on the cave wall behind her, carved deep into the solid limestone, were symbols I'd never seen before. They looked old, real old. "Where are the other 2 cavers?" Dale asked, but Dr. Wells just kept whispering about the screaming giant. That's when the temperature dropped. I mean, dropped fast, like someone had opened a freezer door. Our breath started coming out in white puffs, and frost began forming on the cave walls. In 18 years of cave work, I'd never felt anything like it. And then we saw the eyes. Two red dots, glowing like hot coals, staring at us from the darkness beyond our lamp beams. They were too high up to be human eyes, maybe 8 or 9 feet off the ground, and they were moving, swaying back and forth like they were attached to something walking on 2 legs. The eyes watched us for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then they vanished, and we heard footsteps. Heavy footsteps, moving away from us deeper into the cave system. But these weren't normal footsteps. They echoed wrong, like whatever was making them was walking on stone with feet that weren't quite right. Dale grabbed my arm. "Tom, we need to get out of here now." But I was looking at Dr. Wells, and I knew she was in shock, maybe dying. We couldn't leave her, and she was in no shape to climb out on her own. That's when we heard the scream again, but this time it was different. This time it sounded angry. Getting Dr. Wells up to the first chamber took everything we had. She kept slipping in and out of consciousness, mumbling about the hairy giant and burning red eyes that see right through you. Dale had to practically carry her while I managed the ropes. By the time we got her stabilized in the main chamber, my hands were shaking. Not from the cold, though it was still freezing down there, but from fear. Pure, honest fear, like I hadn't felt since I was a kid afraid of the dark. "We need to get her out of here," Dale said. "Get her to a hospital." "What about the other 2 cavers?" Dale looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Tom, whatever's down here killed them. You saw those claw marks. You saw where that helmet was jammed up in the ceiling. Ain't no bear did that." But I couldn't leave without trying to find them. Call it pride, call it stupidity, but I've never left people behind in these caves, not once in 18 years. "You take Dr. Wells up," I said. "I'll do one more sweep of the lower chambers." "Like hell you will." "Dale, she needs medical attention. That's more important than—" The scream cut me off, louder than before, and coming from multiple directions at once. It echoed through the cave system like the mountain itself was crying out in pain. Dr. Wells started shaking, pressing herself against the cave wall. "It's coming back," she whispered. "The Yahyahash is coming back." That word, Yahyahash, hit me like a punch to the gut. That was the Cherokee word Jimmy Crowfeather had used in his stories. The screaming giant Tioid hat guards the sacred places. "How do you know that name?" I asked her. "Cave paintings," she whispered. "Down in the deep chambers. Cherokee warnings. They tried to seal this place up, but the mining companies broke through in the 20s. Disturbed its resting place." Before I could ask her more, the lights started going out. Not all at once, but one by one, like something was moving through the cave system, snuffing out flames. Our carbide lamps flickered and died, leaving us with just a single flashlight. That's when we heard the footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. And with each step, that smell got stronger. The sweet, rotten smell of death and something else. Something wild and ancient and angry. "It knows we're here," Dr. Wells whispered. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then we heard breathing. Deep, raspy breathing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And in that breathing, I could hear something that sounded almost like words, like the thing was trying to talk. Dale was fumbling with his emergency flare when something hit the cave wall next to his head. A rock the size of a football, thrown with enough force to crack the limestone, then another rock and another, all thrown from the darkness beyond our light. "It's trying to trap us," I realized. "Block the passage back to the entrance." That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. The beam of Dale's flashlight caught it as it moved past the entrance to our chamber. 12 feet tall if it was an inch, covered in long black hair that hung in matted clumps. Its arms were too long for its body, reaching almost to the ground, and its eyes, those burning red eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. But the worst part was its face. It was almost human, but wrong in every way that mattered. The jaw was too big, filled with teeth like broken glass. The nose was flat, almost like a skull. And when it saw us looking at it, it smiled. Then it screamed. Not the three-part scream we'd been hearing, but something new. Something that felt like it was tearing the inside of my skull apart. The sound bounced off the cave walls, getting louder and louder until I thought my eardrums would burst. Dr. Wells started convulsing. Dale dropped the flashlight, clutching his head and moaning, and I just stood there, frozen like a deer in headlights, watching this impossible thing that shouldn't exist. The creature stepped into our chamber, moving with a grace that didn't match its size. It reached out with one massive clawed hand and touched the cave wall. Where its fingers made contact, the limestone cracked like eggshell. Then it looked right at me and spoke. Its voice was like rocks grinding together, but the words were clear enough. "Why do you come to the sacred places? Why do you disturb the old sleep?" I tried to answer, but no sound came out. My throat had closed up tight with fear. The creature tilted its head, studying me like I was some kind of bug. "You smell of the deep earth, of the dark places where men die. You know the taste of stone and sorrow." It was talking about the mines. Somehow this thing knew about my past, about my father's death underground. "The old warnings were forgotten," it continued. "The sacred seals were broken. Now the hungry time begins again." That's when Dale's flare finally ignited, filling the chamber with bright red light. The creature howled and stepped back, raising its arms to shield its eyes. For a moment, I thought we had a chance. Then it laughed, a sound like breaking bones. Light burns, but light dies. And when darkness returns, the screaming giant remembers why men should fear the deep places. The flare was already starting to fade. We had maybe 2 minutes of light left, and then I thought about my son Danny up in Morgantown at college, about how I'd told him he could go caving with his friends next month, about all the caves in these mountains that might have either owned sleeping giants. That's when I remembered what Jimmy Crowfeather had told me years ago, back when I thought his stories were just folklore. He'd said the Cherokee had ways to deal with the Yahyahash. Old ways. Sacred ways. If I was going to save Dale and Dr. Wells, I had to try. The flare was burning down to nothing when I started speaking the words Jimmy Crowfeather had taught me. Cherokee words I'd never thought I'd need, passed down from his grandfather who'd walked the Trail of Tears. "Yahyahash, great guardian, hear me. I am not your enemy. I do not come to steal or destroy." The creature stopped moving toward us, its burning red eyes fixed on me with what might have been surprise. "You speak the old tongue," it said, its voice like grinding stone. "But your words are weak, like wind through dead leaves. You do not believe." It was right. I was just repeating sounds I'd memorized, not really understanding their power. But Dr. Wells was dying, Dale was barely conscious, and that flare had maybe 30 seconds left. "I believe now," I said, and meant it. "I believe you are the guardian of this sacred place. I believe we have trespassed. But these people with me, they didn't know. They're not miners or loggers. They're just lost." The creature stepped closer, close enough that I could smell its breath, like meat that had been rotting for years. It reached out with one massive clawed hand and touched my forehead. The touch burned like ice, and suddenly I could see things. Visions that weren't my own. I saw these mountains as they used to be before the white men came. Covered in ancient forests, home to people who understood that some places were meant to be left alone. I saw the Cherokee sealing up the deep caves, trapping things that should never see sunlight. I saw the logging companies in the 1920s, tearing down everything sacred, breaking the old seals without knowing what they were unleashing. And I saw this creature, the Yahyahash, waking up after decades of sleep, hungry and angry and alone. "You see," it whispered, "you understand now why the screaming began again." The visions faded, and I was back in the cave with a dying flare and 2 people who needed my help. "Let us go," I said. "We'll seal this place again. We'll make sure no one else comes here." The creature studied me for a long moment. Then it looked at Dale and Dr. Wells, and its expression changed. For just a second, I saw something that might have been sadness in those burning eyes. "The woman is broken inside," it said. "The fear has cracked her mind like ice cracks stone. She will not live to see another moon." It was right. Even if we got Dr. Wells to a hospital, I could see she was slipping away. The shock had been too much. "But you," the creature continued, pointing at me with one massive claw, "you will remember. You will tell the old stories again. You will teach the young ones to respect the sacred places." The flare finally died, plunging us into darkness. But the creature's eyes still glowed, giving off just enough light to see by. "Take your friends and go," it said. "But know this, if the seals are broken again, if the sacred places are disturbed, the screaming giant will remember why men learned to fear the dark." I didn't wait for it to change its mind. I grabbed Dale under one arm and Dr. Wells under the other, and started moving toward the passage that led to the entrance. The creature watched us go, its red eyes following our every move. Getting them both up that 20-foot climb to the entrance was the hardest thing I've ever done. Dale kept slipping in and out of consciousness, and Dr. Wells was dead weight. But somehow, maybe with help from something I don't understand, we made it. When we finally crawled out of that cave entrance into the gray October afternoon, it felt like being born again. The fog had lifted, and I could hear birds singing in the trees. Normal sounds. Living sounds. Dr. Wells died. Dee in the helicopter on the way to the hospital. Just like the creature had said, the fear had broken something inside her that couldn't be fixed. The official report said she died of shock and exposure, but I knew better. Dale recovered, but he transferred out of the Forest Service 6 months later. Never talked about what we saw down there, not even to me. Some things are too big for words. As for the other 2 cavers, we never found them. The cave system was sealed permanently a week later, officially due to geological instability. Only a few people know the real reason, and we've all agreed to keep it that way. That was 47 years ago, and I'm still a ranger in these mountains. Still doing cave rescues, though I'm more careful now about which caves I go into. Some places are meant to stay dark. I kept my promise to the Yahyahash. I started visiting Jimmy Crowfeather regularly, learning the old Cherokee stories and the old Cherokee ways. When Jimmy passed in '82, I became the keeper of those stories, at least for our part of the mountains. I tell them to the young rangers who come to work here. Most of them think I'm just a crazy old man with too many ghost stories, but a few listen, really listen, and when they do, I teach them the words Jimmy taught me, the old words that might save their lives someday. Because the Yahyahash wasn't the only thing the Cherokee sealed away in these mountains. There are other caves, other deep places where things that shouldn't exist still sleep. And every year, more people come to explore them. College kids with fancy equipment and no respect for the old warnings. Most of the time, they come back up safe, but not always. Last month, a group of cavers went missing in Seneca Caverns, about 30 miles north of here. They found their equipment scattered around the entrance, cut clean with something sharp. The official report blamed it on bear activity, but I know better. The seals are weakening, the old protections are breaking down, and the things that sleep in the deep places are starting to wake up. My son, Danny, is a ranger now too, working up in the George Washington National Forest. He knows the stories, knows the old words. But his daughter, my granddaughter Sarah, she's studying geology at Virginia Tech, just like Dr. Patricia Wells did all those years ago. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I've done enough, wondering if the stories will be enough to protect the people I care about when the hungry time comes again, because it will come again. The Cherokee knew it, and now I know it too. The things we've buried in the dark places of this world are patient, but they're not gone. They're waiting, listening, growing stronger while we forget the old warnings and break the ancient seals. So when you're out in the mountains, especially the old mountains like these, pay attention to the quiet places. If the birds stop singing and the insects go silent, if your compass starts spinning and your radio picks up sounds that aren't quite right, maybe it's time to head back to the light. And if you hear something screaming in the dark, that 3-part scream that starts like pain and ends like laughter, Don't go looking for what's making that sound. Some things are better left sleeping in the deep places where they belong. But they don't stay sleeping forever. And when they wake up hungry, we'd better remember why our ancestors learned to fear the dark. My name is Thomas Ashford, and I've been keeping watch over these mountains for 65 years now. The old stories are true, every word of them, and the screaming giant still remembers my promise. My name is Margaret O'Brien, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger here in Shenandoah for 15 years now, and I have a PhD in wildlife biology. I study animals that come out at night, owls, bats, foxes, that kind of thing. I love the quiet darkness of these mountains, and I thought I knew every sound the forest could make. I never believed in ghost stories. Mountain folk would tell me about shadow walkers, spirits that moved through the trees like living darkness. I'd smile and nod, but inside I was thinking it was just tired people seeing things that weren't there. I'm a scientist. I believe in facts, not fairy tales. That was before September 15th, 1985. It started when hikers began coming to me with weird stories. They'd say they were being followed by shadows that moved on their own, separate from any person or tree that should be making them. The shadows would slip between the trees, always just at the edge of their vision. "Dr. O'Brien," said Jim Parker, a regular hiker who knew these trails better than most. "I've been walking these mountains for 20 years. What I saw last night, it wasn't natural." Jim was shaking as he talked. This was a man who'd faced down black bears without flinching. But something in Dark Hollow Falls area had scared him bad. "Tell me exactly what you saw," I said, pulling out my notebook. It was like a person made of shadow. It kept pace with me for maybe half a mile, moving through the trees. But here's the thing. When I shined my flashlight right at it, the shadow didn't disappear. It just looked back at me. 3 more hikers came in that week with similar stories, all around Dark Hollow Falls, all at night. As a scientist, I had to check it out. I packed my gear, night vision camera, infrared equipment, trail cameras, all the tools I used to study nocturnal animals. My research assistant, Tommy Vance, a grad student from Virginia Tech, came with me. Tommy was 24, eager, and didn't spook easily. "You really think it's just people seeing things?" Tommy asked as we set up camp near the old CCC ruins from the 1930s. "Has to be," I said, adjusting the trail camera. "Maybe it's a bear with unusual fur patterns or light-playing tricks in the forest. There's always a logical explanation." The first night was quiet. Too quiet. That should have been my first clue. In 15 years of night research, I'd never heard the forest so silent. No owls hooting, no mice rustling in the leaves, no insects buzzing. Even the creek seemed to whisper instead of babble. "Where are all the animals?" Tommy asked around midnight. I checked my bat detector, a device that picks up their high squeaks. Nothing. I'd never seen that before. Bats lived in these mountains by the thousands. They should be everywhere after dark. "Equipment malfunction, maybe," I said, but I was starting to feel uneasy. The next morning, I checked the trail cameras. What I saw made my hands shake. The photos showed shadows, but not normal shadows. In one picture, there was a dark human shape near a big oak tree. In the next photo, taken 30 seconds later, the shadow had moved 20 feet to the left, but the tree was still in the same spot. The moonlight hadn't changed. Nothing that should cast a shadow had moved. "That's impossible," Tommy said, looking over my shoulder. I thought so too. Shadows don't move by themselves. They're just the absence of light. But there it was, clear as day in the photos. We went back that night with more equipment. I brought my thermal camera. It detects heat from living things. If something was out there, it would show up as a warm spot on the cold screen. Around 2 a.m., Tommy grabbed my arm. "Look," he whispered. 30 yards away, a shadow shaped like a person was moving between the trees. It walked upright like a man, but it seemed to glide rather than step. I raised the thermal camera and nearly dropped it. The camera showed a warm shape, something alive, and giving off body heat. But when I looked with my regular eyes, there was nothing there except that moving shadow. "This can't be happening," I muttered. The shadow stopped and turned toward us. Even though it had no face I could see, I felt it looking right at me. Then it was gone, melting back into the darkness between the trees. We packed up and left. Fast. The next day I tried to think of explanations. Maybe the camera was broken. Maybe we were both more tired than we thought. Maybe it was some kind of atmospheric thing, weird air currents making light bend in strange ways. But then Sarah Martinez came into the ranger station. Sarah was an experienced backpacker, the kind who could handle a week alone in the wilderness. She was tough as nails and practical as they come. When she walked into my office, her face was white as paper. "I need to report something," she said, "but you're not going to believe me. Try me." I was camping near Dark Hollow Falls 2 nights ago. Heard voices outside my tent around midnight. Sounded like a family talking, a man, woman, maybe some kids. But they were speaking in this old-fashioned way, like people did a long time ago. She took a shaky breath. I unzipped my tent to look out. There was nobody there. But I could still hear them talking, and I could see impressions in the grass, like invisible people were sitting around a campfire that wasn't there. "What did you do?" "I stayed in my tent until sunrise. When I got up to leave, I found this." She pulled out a photograph. It showed her campsite from above, like someone had taken it from up in the trees. But the angle was impossible. It would have taken a 40-foot ladder to get that shot, and there was no way anyone could have climbed the smooth bark of those old oaks. "I didn't take this picture," Sarah said. "It was in my camera this morning, but I never took it." Stared at the photo. You could see Sarah's tent clearly, and around it in the grass were dark impressions in a circle, like a family of 4 or 5 had been sitting there. That afternoon I called my friend Mary Branham. Mary was an elder with the Monacan Indian Nation, and she knew more about these mountains than anyone alive. Her people had lived here for thousands of years before the park was created. "Mary, I need to ask you something. Have you ever heard of shadow walkers?" There was a long pause. "Why are you asking, Maggie?" I told her about the hikers, the photos, what Tommy and I had seen. When I finished, Mary was quiet for a long time. "You need to be very careful," she finally said. "Those aren't just shadows you're seeing. They're the lost ones. Lost ones. The mountain families who were forced out when they made the park. Some of them, they never left. They're still here, and they're angry." I wanted to argue to say that was impossible, but I couldn't forget that shadow turning to look at me, or the feeling that something with real intelligence had been watching us. "What do they want?" "Justice," Mary said. "And they think you're part of the people who took their homes." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Mary had said. The park had been created in the 1930s, and yes, mountain families had been forced to leave their homes. The government had bought their land, sometimes whether they wanted to sell or not. Some families had lived in these mountains for generations. But that was 50 years ago. People don't turn into shadows when they die. That's not how the world works. At least that's what I kept telling myself. The next morning, everything changed. Tommy and I were heading back to Dark Hollow Falls to collect our equipment when we found the campsite. 2 tents, a cold fire pit, backpacks neatly arranged, but no people. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" No answer. But the tents were still warm inside, and there was hot coffee in a pot by the fire. Whoever had been here had left recently. "Look at this," Tommy said from behind the tents. The camping gear was arranged in a perfect circle around the cold fire pit. Not random, like people had just set their stuff down. Arranged, on purpose. Like someone had moved everything after the campers were gone. I checked the camp permit on one of the backpacks, Dave and Lisa Chen from Richmond. They'd registered for a 3-day camping trip and weren't supposed to check out until tomorrow. "Maybe they went for a hike," Tommy suggested. But their day packs were still here. Their hiking boots were still here. Their car keys were still here. They'd left camp in the middle of the night wearing only their pajamas and socks. We found the first footprints 20 yards from camp. Bare feet, 2 people, walking toward the old CCC ruins deeper in the forest. But here's what made my skin crawl. The footprints just stopped. Mid-step, like Dave and Lisa had been walking and then just vanished. I called for a search and rescue team, but I also set up my cameras that night. If something was taking people, I was going to get it on film. Tommy wanted to stay with me, but I made him go back to town. Whatever was happening, I didn't want him getting hurt. I set up camp in the same spot where Dave and Lisa had been. Maybe that was stupid, but I needed to know what happened to them. Around midnight, the forest went dead silent again. Not even the wind made a sound. Then I heard the voices. Quiet talking. Like a family having a conversation around their dinner table. A man's voice, deep and calm. A woman, speaking in a mountain accent I'd heard from old-timers. Children laughing softly, but there was no one there. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the voices. The light cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. The voices kept talking, getting closer. That's when I saw them. They didn't walk into the light. They walked out of the shadows themselves. A man, a woman, 2 children, all made of living darkness. They moved like people, but they were just shadow shapes against the night. The man's shadow looked right at me. When he spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from far away, even though he was only 10 feet from my tent. "You don't belong here," he said. "This is our home." I tried to speak, but no words came out. These things were impossible. Shadows don't talk. Shadows don't have families. The woman's shadow moved closer. "Where are our neighbors?" she asked. "The young couple who came to visit?" I knew she meant Dave and Lisa. What did you do to them?" "We invited them home," the man said. "They're with us now, safe from the people who steal mountains." One of the child shadows ran up to my tent and put its hand against the fabric. I felt cold seep through the material like ice water running down my arm. "Are you going to steal our mountain too?" the child asked. I found my voice. "I'm not stealing anything. I work here. I protect the animals." The shadows looked at each other. The woman spoke again. "You work for the ones who took everything from us. Our house, our garden, our ancestors' graves. They said it was for the good of everyone. But what about us? What about our good?" I realized what I was seeing. These weren't monsters. They were a family. A family that had been forced from their home 50 years ago. And somehow they were still here, still angry, still protecting what they thought was theirs. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said. "But I'm not the one who did it." The man's shadow stepped closer. "You wear their uniform. You carry their authority. You are them." The temperature around my tent dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Frost formed on the fabric. The child shadow reached through the tent wall like it wasn't there and touched my arm. Pain shot through. Me, not physical pain, but something deeper. Like the child was pulling something vital out of me. My strength, my warmth, my life itself. "Stop," I whispered. The shadow family stepped back. "Come with us," the woman said. "Meet your neighbors. See where we live now." Through the tent wall, I saw more shadows gathering. Dozens of them. Men, women, children. All made of living darkness. An entire community of shadow people. All watching me with invisible eyes. They'd found Dave and Lisa. And now they wanted me. I wasn't getting out of this by running. There were too many of them, and they could move through the forest faster than any living person. If I was going to survive, I had to understand what they really wanted. "Before I come with you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "can you show me what happened? Help me understand?" The man's shadow tilted his head. "You want to see?" "Yes." The world around me changed. Suddenly I wasn't in 1985 anymore. I was seeing the mountain as it had been in 1935. There were houses tucked into the hollows, gardens carved into the hillsides, children playing by the creek, families who had lived here for generations, making their living from the land. Then came the government men in suits, papers to sign, notices to leave. Some families got fair payment for their land. Others got almost nothing. A few refused to sell at all. They said it was eminent domain, the man Shadow explained as I watched the scene unfold around me. For the greater good, the mountains would be preserved for everyone. I saw families packing their belongings, loading wagons, taking one last look at homes their great-grandfathers had built. Some went willingly. Others had to be forced out by armed men. "We were the Jennings family," the woman Shadow said. "4 generations on this mountain. Our roots went deeper than the old oak trees." "What happened to you?" "We refused to leave. This was our home. Our children were buried in the family plot behind the house." "How do you abandon your children?" The vision showed me an older couple, the Shadows when they were alive, barricading themselves in their cabin, government officials trying to negotiate, threats being made. "Winter came early that year," the man Shadow continued. "They cut off our supplies, thinking hunger would drive us out. But we knew how to live off the land. We could have lasted until spring. But the fire. I saw it then. The cabin burning in the night. Not an accident. Someone had set it on purpose, thinking the family had already left. But they were still inside. We died in our home," the woman said. "All of us. And our spirits couldn't leave. This mountain is where we belong." The vision faded, and I was back in my tent, surrounded by shadow people. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "That was wrong. What they did to you was wrong." "Sorry doesn't give us back our lives," said another shadow voice. This one sounded older, like a grandmother. "Sorry doesn't let us rest. What do you need? How can I help?" The shadows murmured among themselves. Finally, the man spoke again. "We need someone to remember, someone to tell the truth about what happened here. The park tells visitors about the wildlife, the pretty views, but they don't talk about us, about the people who died to make this place. And the visitors you've been taking? We don't hurt them. We bring them to see, to understand. But they get scared and run, and then they forget. They think we're just bad dreams." I thought about Dave and Lisa. Where are they now? Safe. Learning. We'll let them go when they truly understand what was lost here. A child shadow tugged at my sleeve. "Will you tell people about us? Will you make them remember?" I looked around at all the shadow faces. Families who had been erased from history, forgotten except as a footnote in the park's creation story. They didn't want to hurt anyone. They just wanted to be remembered. But they were still dead, still spirits, still dangerous in ways they might not even understand. "I'll tell people," I promised. "But you have to let the visitors go. All of them. And you can't keep taking people." The shadows talked among themselves in whispers. Finally, the man nodded. "If you keep your promise, we'll keep ours. But if you forget us again, I won't forget." The woman shadow stepped forward and touched my hand. Instead of cold, I felt warmth, sadness, relief. "Thank you," she whispered. One by one, the shadows faded back into the darkness, but I could still feel them watching, waiting to see if I would keep my word. Dave and Lisa were found the next morning, walking out of the forest in a daze. They couldn't remember much about where they'd been, but they both said the same thing. They'd learned something important about the mountain's history, something everyone should know. I filed my official report, but I wrote it carefully. Visitors experiencing disorientation due to historical trauma sites. Recommend educational signage about displaced mountain families. The Park Service didn't ask too many questions. They were just happy no one was hurt. But I kept my real promise. I started researching the families who had lived here before the park. I found their names, their stories, their photographs. The Jennings family had been real. They'd died in a cabin fire in December 1935, just as the shadow had shown me. I wrote articles for history journals. I gave talks at local schools. I made sure the visitor center added a display about the mountain families who had lived here for generations before the land became a park. And I went back to Mary Branham. You knew what I'd find out there, didn't you? Mary nodded. The mountain families, they tried to tell their story for years, but nobody listened. It took someone like you, someone the spirits thought was part of the problem, to finally hear them. Are they at peace now? More than they were, but they're still here. They'll always be here. This is their home. She was right. Even now, 3 months later, I sometimes see them when I'm doing my night research. Just glimpses. A shadow moving differently than it should, a whisper in the wind that sounds like an old mountain accent. But they don't bother the visitors anymore. They got what they wanted, someone to remember. The truth is, I'm not the same person I was before that night. I still believe in science, in facts and evidence, but I also believe in things that can't be measured with instruments. I believe that some injustices are so deep they echo through generations. And I believe that sometimes the dead don't rest until the living remember their stories. If you ever visit Shenandoah National Park, stop by the visitor center. Read about the mountain families who lived here before it was a park. Learn their names. Remember that this beautiful place was once home to real people with real lives. And if you're hiking at night around Dark Hollow Falls and you see a shadow moving wrong, don't run. Stop and listen. You might hear the whisper of history, the voices of people who just want their story told. Because some shadows aren't cast by the living. Some shadows are memories, walking among us, waiting for someone to remember them home. My name is Isaiah Brennan, but everyone calls me Ike. I've been a park ranger in these North Carolina mountains for 21 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. Turns out, I was dead wrong. People trust park rangers. We're the ones who show up when hikers get lost, when campers spot bears, when forest fires threaten whole towns. We know every trail, every creek, every rocky outcrop in our territory. At least, that's what I believed until August 12, 1973. The Pisgah National Forest is my beat. 45 miles of dense mountain wilderness stretching out from Asheville. My specialty is fire prevention and backcountry enforcement. That means I spend most of my time alone, hiking trails that most folks never see, checking on remote campsites, making sure nobody's doing stupid things that could burn down half the state. My family's been in these mountains since before North Carolina was even a state. We're Scots-Irish mountain people through and through. My great-great-grandfather cleared land here in the 1800s. My grandmother on my mother's side was Cherokee, one of the families that hid in these hills when the government tried to force them all west in 1838. She used to tell me old stories about the mountains, about spirits and medicine men and animals that could understand human speech. I always figured those were just stories. The summer of 1973 was brutal. We hadn't seen rain in 6 weeks, and the temperature hit over 90 degrees most days. The forest was dry as kindling, and everyone was on edge about fires. That's why I was spending so much time in the backcountry around Looking Glass Rock, this massive granite dome that rises up like a giant's shoulder from the forest floor. The Cherokee considered this area sacred. My grandmother told me they used to come here for vision quests and medicine ceremonies. She said the rock at sea, Elf, was special, that it could call to the animals and make them listen. Of course, I never put much stock in that kind of talk. I was a federal law enforcement officer with a badge and a gun and 20 years of wilderness training. I dealt in facts, not fairy tales. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning when I was checking fire conditions near the base of Looking Glass Rock. I'd been walking the same trail for 2 hours when I noticed the quiet. In a healthy forest, you hear birds singing, insects buzzing, squirrels chattering in the trees. Small sounds that let you know everything's normal. But this morning, the woods were silent as a cemetery. Not even a cricket chirping. I stopped walking and listened hard. Nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the soft crunch of pine needles under my boots. That's when I saw the tracks. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Black bear prints crossed the trail, heading toward the rock. Nothing unusual about that. We had plenty of bears in the area. But 20 feet further on, I found mountain lion tracks going the same direction. Then timber rattlesnake signs. Then more bear tracks, but from a different animal. In 21 years of tracking, I'd never seen anything like it. Predators don't travel together. Bears avoid mountain lions. Cats avoid snakes. Everything avoids everything else unless it's mating season or there's a food source drawing them in. But these tracks all led the same way, straight toward Looking Glass Rock. I radioed back to headquarters. Base, this is Ranger Brennan. I'm seeing unusual animal activity in Sector 7, requesting backup for investigation. The radio crackled with static. Copy that, Ike. Dale's about 30 minutes out. What kind of activity? Dale Whitehead was my partner, a good man who'd been ranging almost as long as I had. Mixed species cons, verging on the same area. Could be disease outbreak or unusual food source. I'm going to scout ahead. Negative, Ike. Wait for backup. But I was already moving. Something about those tracks bothered me in a way I couldn't put into words. They were too neat, too purposeful, like the animals knew exactly where they were going. The trail wound through thick rhododendron bushes that formed natural tunnels over the path. In the summer heat, these rhododendron hells, as we called them, stayed cool and dark even at midday. Usually, they were a relief from the sun. Today, they felt like walking through a cave. I kept my hand on my service revolver and tried to shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I got closer to Looking Glass Rock, the tracks got thicker. Not just bear and mountain lion now, but deer, wild boar, foxes, raccoons, opossums. Every animal in the forest seemed to be heading to the same place. Some of the prints were so fresh the dirt was still damp. That's when I heard the sound. Low and deep, like a foghorn in the distance. But this wasn't coming from any machine. It rolled through the forest like thunder, except the sky was clear blue without a cloud in sight. The sound came again, and this time I felt it in my chest as much as heard it. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. The mountains have their own language, Isaiah. Most folks just forgot how to listen. I was starting to remember why I'd tried so hard to forget those old stories. The sound led me to a clearing I'd never seen before, even though I'd hiked this area dozens of times. It was perfectly round, maybe 50 feet across, with Looking Glass Rock towering above it like a stone giant. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of old stones covered in moss and carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Cherokee symbols, I realized with a chill. My grandmother had shown me similar markings in her old books. The animal tracks circled the stone ring, layer upon layer of prints in the dirt. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that all the tracks faced inward toward the center of the circle. Like every animal in the forest had come here to listen to something. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. Evidence. Facts. Things I could show to my supervisor to prove I wasn't losing my mind. That's when I saw him. An old Cherokee man stood at the far edge of the clearing, watching me. He appeared so suddenly and silently that my heart jumped into my throat. 1 second, the clearing was empty. The next, he was there. He was ancient, maybe 80 years old, with long white hair braided down his back and skin dark as walnut wood. He wore traditional Cherokee clothes, leather pants, beaded shirt, moccasins that made no sound on the forest floor. But his eyes were what got my attention. They were dark brown, but they caught the light like an animal's eyes, like they had a shine of their own. "You're on sacred ground, son," he said in English, but with the careful pronunciation of someone who learned it as a second language. I kept my hand near my gun but didn't draw it. "Sir, this is federal land, part of Pisgah National Forest. I'm Ranger Brennan, and I need to ask you some questions about—" He made that low, deep sound I'd heard before. It came from his throat, but somehow it seemed to fill the whole clearing. And from the forest around us, other sounds answered back. A bear's grunt from the north, a mountain lion's cough from the south, the rattling buzz of a timber rattler from somewhere behind me. The old man smiled, and I saw that his teeth were filed to points. "The animals are restless," he said. "White men have been where they shouldn't be, taking things that don't belong to them. The forest is angry. Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me. There are some questions. He made another sound, this one higher and sharper. Immediately, I heard movement in the trees around the clearing. Lots of movement, until branches creaking, leaves rustling, the soft pad of heavy paws on earth. They were coming, all of them. A black bear emerged from the trees to my left, a big male, maybe 400 pounds, with scars across his snout that spoke of old fights. He sat down at the edge of the clearing like a trained dog and fixed his small black eyes on me. Then came the mountain lion, sleek and golden, padding out of the forest to take a position opposite the bear. A timber rattlesnake slithered into view, coiling itself at the base of one of the stone markers. Ravens landed in the trees overhead, their black eyes glittering. More animals kept coming. Foxes, raccoons, wild boar with tusks like daggers, deer with antlers, sharp as spears. Within minutes, I was surrounded by every predator and prey animal in the forest, all sitting quietly in a perfect circle around the clearing, all watching me. "My name is Johnny Crow Dog," the old man said. "I am the last beast caller of the Eastern Cherokee. My people have guarded these mountains for 1,000 years. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I wanted to draw my gun, but my hand was frozen. The animals hadn't made a threatening move, but their presence was so unnatural, so impossible, that my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. "This isn't real," I whispered. Johnny Crow Dog tilted his head. "Your grandmother was Mary Sequoia's daughter. You have the blood. You should understand." The mention of my grandmother's name hit me like a slap. Mary Sequoia had been her Cherokee name, the one she only used when she told the old stories. I'd never told anyone that name. It wasn't in any federal records. "How do you—" "She taught you the old ways when you were small," Johnny Crow Dog continued. "Before your parents made her stop. Before they sent you to white schools and white churches and taught you to forget what you were." He was right. When I was very young, maybe 6 or 7, my grandmother used to take me into the woods and show me things. How to read animal signs, how to find water in dry ground, how to move through the forest without making sound. She taught me Cherokee words and told me stories about the time before white settlers came. Then my father found out and put a stop to it. Said we were Americans now, not Indians. Said the old ways would only hold me back. "She's been dead 10 years, I said. "Death is just another country," Johnny Crow Dog replied. "She watches from there. She sent me to test you." "Test me for what?" But before I could ask, he raised his hand and made another call. This one was different. Urgent. Warning. Every animal in the clearing turned toward the forest trail. Their hackles rose, teeth bared, claws extended. Someone was coming. I heard voices through the trees getting closer. Hikers, by the sound of it. A man and woman laughing and talking as they approached the clearing. "Turn them away," Johnny Crow Dog said. "This place is not for them." I wanted to ask him what would happen if I didn't, but the look in the animal's eyes gave me the answer. The bear was on its feet now, muscles bunched for a charge. The mountain lion crouched low, tail lashing. Even the deer had their heads down, antlers pointed toward the trail like spears. "Hey!" I called out, moving toward the trail. "This area is closed. You need to turn back." A young couple emerged from the trees, both wearing expensive hiking gear and carrying fancy cameras. The kind of people who drove up from Charlotte or Atlanta for weekend adventures in the mountains. "Closed?" the man said. "We didn't see any signs." "Emergency wildlife situation," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Aggressive bear activity. You need to leave immediately." The woman pointed past me toward the clearing. "Oh my God, Tom, look at all those animals. This is perfect for photos." She started toward the clearing, camera raised. Behind me, I heard a low growl that seemed to come from every animal at once. "No!" I grabbed her arm. "You cannot go in there. It's extremely dangerous." "Let go of me," she snapped. "You can't keep us out of a public forest." The growling got louder. I glanced back and saw that every animal in the clearing was now standing, ready to attack. Johnny Crow Dog watched silently, his strange eyes glowing in the afternoon sun. "Please," I said to the couple, "just trust me. Go back the way you came and don't stop until you reach the parking area." Something in my voice must have convinced them, because they backed away. The man pulled out a cell phone. "I'm calling your supervisor. This is harassment." "No signal up here," I said. "But you do that when you get down the mountain." They left, muttering about filing complaints and contacting lawyers. I watched until they disappeared down the trail, then turned back to the clearing. It was empty. No animals. No stone circle. No Cherokee man with filed teeth and glowing eyes. Just a normal forest clearing with normal trees and normal shadows. But the tracks were still there. Hundreds of animal prints in the dirt, all facing toward the center of an empty space where I could swear I'd seen ancient stones. I knelt down and touched one of the bear prints. The dirt was warm, like the animal had just passed by. From somewhere in the forest came that low, thunderous call, and from all around me, the mountains answered back. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those animals sitting in their perfect circle, watching me with intelligent eyes. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was all stress and heat exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. Then Dale Whitehead radioed in with a report that shattered that comfortable lie. "Ike, you need to get out to Cradle of Forestry Trail about 2 miles past the visitor center. We've got a situation." "What kind of situation?" "Just get out here and bring the camera." I found Dale standing in the middle of the trail, looking like he'd seen a ghost. He'd been a ranger for 18 years, and I'd never seen him rattled by anything. O'Day. His hands were shaking as he lit his third cigarette of the morning. "Tell me what happened," I said. He pointed down the trail. "Hikers called it in around dawn. Said they were attacked by a pack of animals working together. Bears, mountain lions, wild boar, even snakes, all acting like they were part of the same army." The word army made my stomach clench. "Anyone hurt?" "3 people in the hospital. Not killed, just herded. Like the animals were driving them away from something instead of trying to eat them." We walked down the trail together, and I saw what he meant. The attack site looked like a battlefield. Trees were clawed and bitten. The ground was torn up by hooves and paws. But there was no blood, no sign that the animals had been trying to kill. "It's like they were sending a message," Dale said. "More than that. The destruction formed a pattern. Claw marks and hoof prints made a rough circle around a specific area of forest. An area that, according to my map, was directly between the trail and several Cherokee historical sites." "Dale, have you heard about any construction or development planned for this area?" He flicked his cigarette into the dirt and stomped on it. "Matter of fact, yes. Some company from Charlotte bought mineral rights to a big chunk of land around Looking Glass Rock, planning to do some test drilling for copper or something." My blood went cold. "When?" "Soon as the permit's clear. Maybe next month." That evening I drove to the Cherokee reservation just outside the forest boundary. I needed to talk to someone who might know about Johnny Crow Dog, someone who understood the old ways my grandmother had tried to teach me. I found Elder Joseph Swimmer at the tribal offices, a man in his 70s who served as keeper of Cherokee oral traditions. When I mentioned Johnny Crow Dog, his face went white. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked in a whisper. "I met him yesterday, up at Looking Glass Rock." Joseph Swimmer was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the mountains. Finally, he spoke. "Johnny Crow. Dog died in 1932. He was the last of the beast callers, the last Cherokee who could speak the old language of the animals. The government tried to arrest him for disturbing the peace when he used his power to stop a logging company from cutting sacred trees. If he died in 1932, then who did I meet?" The old man looked at me with sad eyes. "Some things are too strong to die, especially when the land itself calls them back. Johnny Crow Dog swore he would protect these mountains forever, even if it took his spirit 100 years to return." He pulled out a leather pouch and showed me its contents, small carved stones covered in Cherokee symbols. "These are protection stones. My grandfather gave them to me, and his grandfather gave them to him. You'll need them if you plan to go back up there." "Why would I go back?" "Because you're Cherokee, son, even if your family tried to make you forget. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. And Johnny Crow Dog chose you for a reason." I took the stones, feeling their smooth weight in my palm. They were warm, like they'd been sitting in sunlight. What does he want from me? Same thing he wanted when he was alive, Joseph Swimmer said, to protect the sacred places from those who would destroy them. The next morning I hiked back to Looking Glass Rock. The forest was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Watchful. Waiting. I found the clearing easily this time, as if the trees themselves were guiding me. The stone circle was visible now in broad daylight, ancient Cherokee symbols carved deep into granite. At the center of the circle sat Johnny Crow Dog, looking exactly as he had the day before. "You came back," he said. "I need to understand what's happening here." He stood up slowly, his old bones creaking like tree branches in the wind. "White men are coming to cut into the earth. They want to take what's beau, ride in the sacred places. Copper, they call it. But some things should stay buried." "Why are you showing yourself to me?" "Because you're the only one who can stop them. You wear their uniform, carry their authority. But you have Cherokee blood. You can walk in both worlds." I felt the protection stones in my pocket, warm against my fingers. "What happens if I don't?" Johnny Crow Dog made one of his deep, resonant calls. From all around the clearing came answering voices. Not just animal sounds now, but something else. Something that made the hair on my arm stand up. "The mountains will protect themselves," he said. "But innocent people might get hurt in the battle." That afternoon, I drove to the county offices and looked up the mineral rights permits. Crystal Creek Mining Company out of Charlotte had indeed purchased drilling rights to a huge section of forest around Looking Glass Rock. The permits were already approved. Drilling would begin in 2 weeks. I called the company and asked to speak with the project manager. A man named Robertson came on the line, sounding irritated. "We're not required to notify Park Service about our activities," he said. "This is private land now." "Sir, this area has significant Cherokee historical sites. There might be grounds for historical preservation protection." "We had archaeologists survey the area, nothing but trees and rocks." "Did your archaeologists find any stone circles? Any carved symbols?" Long pause. "No, nothing like that was reported. But I knew they were lying, or their surveyors had been too scared to report what they really found." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Joseph Swimmer had said. Some things are too strong to die. If Johnny Crow Dog really was a spirit, if he really could command the animals of the forest, what would happen when the mining equipment arrived? I got my answer sooner than expected. Around midnight, my radio crackled to life. "All units, we have multiple reports of aggressive wildlife throughout the forest. Repeat, coordinated animal attacks across multiple locations." I grabbed my gear and drove toward the reports. What I found looked like something out of a nightmare. A campground near the base of Looking Glass Rock was in chaos. Bears had torn through tents, but instead of looking for food, they'd simply destroyed everything and left. Mountain lions had been spotted walking down the main road in broad moonlight. Timber rattlesnakes were found coiled on car hoods and tent platforms. But strangest of all, none of the animals had hurt anyone. They'd terrified people, destroyed property, and made their presence known. But not a single person had been seriously injured. It was a warning, a demonstration of power, and it was just the beginning. The mining company arrived exactly 2 weeks later with a convoy of trucks, drilling equipment, and a crew of 20 men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Word about the animal problems in the area had spread, and most of the workers kept glancing nervously at the tree line. I met them at the access road, wearing my full ranger uniform and trying to project authority I didn't feel. "Gentlemen, I need to inform you that this area is experiencing unusual wildlife activity. For your safety, I recommend postponing operations until—" "Ranger Brennan, is it?" The project manager, Robertson, stepped out of the lead truck. He was a big man in an expensive suit, the kind of person who solved problems by throwing money at them. "We appreciate your concern, but we have permits and deadlines. A few bears and mountain lions aren't going to stop a $1 million operation." He signaled to his crew, and they started unloading equipment. Heavy machinery, drilling rigs, generators that would fill the quiet forest with noise and diesel fumes. I felt the protection stones growing warm in my pocket. As the crew set up their base camp, I noticed the forest around us was completely silent. No bird songs, no insect noises, no small sounds of life. Even the wind had stopped moving through the trees. "Mr. Robertson," I tried again, "I really think you should reconsider. The Cherokee consider this area sacred and—" "The Cherokee don't own this land anymore," he said flatly. "We do, and we're going to drill." That's when the first truck engine died, then the second, then the generator that was powering their equipment. One by one, every piece of machinery simply stopped working. "What the hell?" Robertson kicked the side of his truck. "Rodriguez, check the fuel lines." But I knew it wasn't a mechanical problem. The forest itself was rejecting their presence. A low, thunderous call rolled across the valley, echoing off the granite face of Looking Glass Rock. The workers stopped what they were doing and looked around nervously. "What was that?" one of them asked. "Probably just thunder," Robertson said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. The call came again, closer this time. And from all around us, other voices answered. Bear grunts, mountain lion screams, the buzz of rattlesnakes, the harsh cries of ravens. "Okay, that's not thunder," Rodriguez said, backing toward the trucks. That's when they appeared. They came out of the forest like shadows made solid. Bears, mountain lions, wild boar, timber rattlesnakes, hawks and eagles circling overhead. Dozens of animals moving with unnatural coordination toward the mining camp. The workers panicked, scrambling for the trucks, but the engines still wouldn't start. Some of the men grabbed tools as weapons, but I knew that wouldn't help them. "Nobody move," I said loudly. "Stay very still and don't make eye contact." "Are you insane?" Robertson shouted. "We're about to be eaten by every predator in North Carolina." The animals formed a circle around the camp, just like they had in the clearing. But this time, their message was clear. The bears were standing on their hind legs, towering over the workers. The mountain lions crouched low, ready to spring. Even the deer had their antlers, lowered like spears. One word from Johnny Crow Dog, and this would become a massacre. That's when I saw him, walking out of the trees like he owned them. The old Cherokee man moved through the circle of animals, and they parted for him like he was their king. "You were warned," he said to Robertson. "The sacred places are not for digging." Robertson's face had gone white, but he still tried to maintain control. "I don't know what kind of trained animal act this is, but—" Johnny Crow Dog made a soft clicking sound. Immediately, every animal took one step closer to the humans. The message was unmistakable. "This land has been Cherokee for 1,000 years before your people came," the old man said. "It will be Cherokee for 1,000 years after you're gone. Some things don't belong to anyone except the earth itself." I stepped forward, feeling the protection stones burning like coals in my pocket. There has to be another way. A compromise. Johnny Crow Dog turned those strange, glowing eyes on me. "You think there can be peace between those who take and those who protect?" "I think there can be understanding." He studied me for a long moment. Around us, the animals waited with predator patience. "Your grandmother said you had wisdom," he said finally. "Show me." I turned to Robertson, who was trying to edge toward one of the trucks. "Mr. Robertson, I'm ordering you to evacuate this area immediately. Federal Environmental Protection Act, Section 12. This land is being placed under emergency protection status." "You can't do that. We have permits." "I can, and I am." I pulled out my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Brennan. I need immediate backup at Looking Glass Rock Access Road. We have a federal environmental emergency in progress." It was a bluff. I didn't really have authority to shut down their operation, but Robertson didn't know that, and with a circle of wild animals surrounding his crew, he wasn't in a position to argue. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth, "but this isn't over. We'll be back with lawyers and federal court orders." "Maybe," I said, "but not today." Johnny Crow Dog made another call, and the animals began to withdraw into the forest. Within minutes, they had vanished as silently as they had appeared. The old Cherokee man looked at me one more time, "The blood remembers," he said. Then he too faded back into the trees, leaving only the scent of sage and cedar in the air. As Robertson and his crew packed up their equipment, I realized something had changed inside me. For 21 years, I'd been a federal ranger. Now, I was something else as well. Now, I was Cherokee. The mining permits were mysteriously revoked 3 days later. No official explanation was given, but rumors spread that environmental activists had filed successful court challenges based on Cherokee historical protection laws. I knew better. Some battles are won in courtrooms, and some are won in the deep places where spirits still walk. The animal attacks stopped after the mining crew left, but the forest around Looking Glass Rock remained different, quieter, more watchful. Hikers reported feeling like they were being observed, and several photographers claimed their cameras malfunctioned near the ancient Cherokee sites. I never saw Johnny Crow Dog again, but sometimes when I hiked the trails alone, I heard his calls echoing from the granite cliffs. And always, the mountains answered back. 6 months later, I was promoted to senior ranger for the entire Pisgah district. My supervisor said I'd shown exceptional judgment in handling the wildlife crisis. He never asked for details about what really happened up there, and I never volunteered any. But I did start incorporating Cherokee place names and historical information into my trail towel, KS, with visitors. I began working with the tribal council on land protection issues, and I started teaching my own children the old stories my grandmother had shared with me, the ones my father had tried to make me forget. Because some things are too important to lose. Last month I got a call from a ranger in the Smoky Mountains. Similar reports, animals behaving strangely, coordinating attacks on development sites, protecting areas the Cherokee consider sacred. The caller said an old Cherokee man had been spotted in the area, someone who could call the animals like they were his own family. I told him what I could without sounding crazy. Advised him to work with the tribal council, to respect the old boundaries, to remember that some land doesn't belong to anyone except itself. After I hung up, I touched the protection stones in my pocket. They were cool now, sleeping, but I knew they would warm again if they were needed. Because Johnny Crow Dog wasn't the only beast caller. He was just the first to come back. The Cherokee have a saying, "The mountains remember everything." I used to think that was just poetry. Now I know it's a promise and a warning. These days, when developers and mining companies come sniffing around Cherokee historical sites, they tend to have equipment problems. Survey crews report feeling watched in the deep woods. Geologists find their instruments giving impossible readings near ancient sacred places. I file the reports with appropriate federal agencies and make sure they get the attention they deserve. It's amazing how many permits get denied when someone takes the time to do proper historical research. Some of my fellow rangers think I've gone native, spending too much time with tribal elders and reading too many Cherokee legends. They're not wrong. I have gone native. I've remembered what I always was. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. And sometimes, late at night when I'm camping in the deep woods, I make the old calls my grandmother taught me when I was small. Low, resonant sounds that carry for miles through the mountain air. I'm not a beast caller like Johnny Crow Dog. I don't have that kind of power. But I'm learning. And the mountains are listening. My name is Samuel McLeod, but everyone just calls me Sam. I've been a ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 16 years now, and I've seen things up here that would make your hair stand on end. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened on Grandfather Mountain that November night in 1981. Let me back up a bit. I'm what you'd call a high-altitude rescue specialist. After 6 years as a Navy rescue swimmer, I thought I'd seen every way a person could get themselves in trouble. Turns out the mountains have their own special brand of danger. I've pulled bodies out of crevices so deep the sun never touches them. I've rappelled down cliff faces in weather that would ground helicopters. I've done mouth-to-mouth on hypothermic climbers while hanging from a rope in 40-mile-per-hour winds. The point is, I'm not some city boy who jumps at shadows. I know these mountains like the back of my hand. Every trail, every overlook, every weather pattern. When tourists ask me about the weird sounds they hear at night, I tell them it's just wind through the rocks. When they swear they saw lights moving on the peaks, I explain about car headlights reflecting off the mist. My grandfather used to tell different stories. Old Duncan MacLeod came over from Scotland in 1923, carrying nothing but a worn Bible and a head full of Highland tales. He'd sit me on his knee when I was little and whisper about the Watchers in the Mountains, spirits of clan warriors who followed Scottish families to America. "The old country spirits don't stay put, Sammy," he'd say in that thick accent. "They follow the blood wherever it goes." Pure nonsense, of course. Just old country superstition. I'm a man of science, trained in emergency medicine and mountain weather. I believe in barometric pressure and wind shear, not ghostly Highland warriors. At least I used to. November 7th, 1981 started, like any other day. I was manning the weather station near Mile High Swinging Bridge when the call came in around 3 p.m. A climbing party of 4, experienced folks from Asheville, had been overdue since their scheduled check-in at noon. Their last radio contact mentioned something odd. "There's someone watching us from the upper peaks." I figured they'd spotted another climber. Happens all the time. People see movement on the rocks and assume it's human. Usually turns out to be a black bear or just shadows playing tricks. The weather was turning nasty fast. November storms in these mountains don't mess around. The barometer had been dropping all morning, and I could smell snow in the air. By 4 p.m., we had 40-mile-per-hour winds and temperatures dropping toward freezing. Jenny Morrison, our helicopter pilot, tried to get airborne for a search pattern, but the winds were too crazy. "Something's not right up there, Sam," she radioed from the helipad. "My compass is spinning like a carnival ride. Never seen anything like it." I grabbed my rescue pack and headed up the trail on foot. Standard protocol when weather grounds the chopper. The missing party had been attempting the Grandfather Trail, a tough route that skirts the highest peaks. In good weather, it's challenging. In an early winter storm, it's a death trap. The wind hit me like a freight train as soon as I cleared the tree line. But there was something else, something that made the hair on my neck stand up. The wind was making sounds I'd never heard before, long, mournful notes that almost sounded like music, like bagpipes played far away. I shook it off. Wind does funny things in these rock formations, creates all kinds of acoustic effects. I'd heard it whistle through crevices, howl through gaps, even sound like voices sometimes. This was just another weird mountain noise. But as I climbed higher, fighting a wind with every step, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Not animal watching, something else. Something that made my Scottish blood run cold. The first thing I found was Sarah Campbell's pack, about 2 miles up the Grandfather Trail. Dr. Campbell was the team leader, a geology professor who'd climbed all over the world. Her pack was sitting on a flat rock, perfectly dry despite the storm. Contents arranged in a neat circle around the outside. That should have been impossible. The wind was howling at 60 miles per hour. Nothing stays neat in weather like that. But here was Sarah's gear laid out like someone had been organizing it for a picnic. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Sam. Found Campbell's pack at marker 7. Equipment arranged in unusual pattern, no sign of the climber." "Copy that, Sam. What kind of pattern?" I stared at the arrangement again. Rope coiled in perfect spirals, carabiners linked in a complex design, first aid kit contents spread out in... I squinted through the snow. It looked almost like a Celtic knot, the kind my grandfather used to draw in the dirt when he told his stories. "Hard to describe," I radioed back. "Looks intentional. Someone took time to set this up." But who? And why? And how had everything stayed so perfectly arranged in this wind? I stuffed Sarah's gear into my pack and kept climbing. The storm was getting worse. Snow mixed with sleet stung my face like needles. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. I was navigating by feel now, following the trail markers more by instinct than sight. That's when I heard the voices. At first, I thought it was just the wind again. These mountains are full of acoustic tricks. But as I stopped to listen, sheltering behind a boulder, I realized the sounds were coming through my radio. Faint voices speaking in a language I almost recognized. Gaelic, Old Scottish Gaelic. My grandfather had taught me a few words when I was young, enough to recognize the rhythm, the harsh consonants, the rolling R's, but this was different, older somehow, more formal. I checked my radio frequency, still locked on the Ranger channel, but mixed with the static, I could hear men's voices speaking in urgent tones, discussing something important. I caught a few words: McLeod, mountain, honor, before the transmission faded. "Base, are you getting any unusual radio traffic?" I called. "Negative, Sam, just you. How's the weather up there?" I looked around. The storm had intensified beyond anything the forecast predicted. The wind was now screaming at what felt like 80 miles per hour. Snow was falling so thick I could barely see my own feet, and the temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees in the past hour. "Weather's worse than predicted," I reported, requesting immediate backup if possible. "Sorry, Sam. Jenny can't get the bird up in this wind. You're on your own until it calms down." That's when I saw the first cairn. Cairns are rock piles that mark trails. Every hiker knows them. Simple stacks of stones to show the way. But this one was different. 12 feet tall, made of perfectly fitted granite blocks, carved with symbols I'd never seen on any topographic map. Celtic spirals, clan crests. And at the base, scratched into the largest stone, was the McLeod family motto: "Hold fast." My hands started shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. I'd been hiking these mountains for 16 years. I knew every trail marker, every rock formation, every man-made structure. This cairn had never been here before, but the weathering on the stones suggested it had stood for decades. I pulled out my map and GPS unit. According to both, I was standing on empty mountain. No structures, no trail markers, nothing but raw wilderness. But there it was, right in front of me. 12 feet of carved stone that shouldn't exist. The Gaelic voices on my radio got louder. I kept climbing, following what looked like a path worn into the rock. But it wasn't on any map. It seemed to wind directly toward the highest peak, through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate in this weather. 20 minutes later, I found the second, cairn. Then a third, each one taller and more elaborate than the last, each one carved with symbols that made something deep in my chest tighten with recognition. These were clan markers, Highland territory boundaries, the kind my grandfather had described from the old country. But that was impossible. The Scottish settlers in these mountains had been farmers and mill workers, not Highland warriors. They'd left the clan system behind in Scotland, hadn't they? The wind suddenly died. Complete silence. In mountains that had been screaming with weather for hours, the sudden quiet felt wrong, unnatural. That's when I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, the crunch of boots on frozen ground. But there was something else, a metallic sound, like chainmail or armor moving. I turned around, heart hammering. The trail behind me was empty, but in the snow, clear as day, were footprints, not hiking boots or modern gear. These looked like the prints of soft leather boots, and they were huge, size 13 at least. The footprints led from the last cairn straight toward me, but they stopped about 10 feet away, as if someone had been standing there, watching me. My radio crackled to life. "Sam McLeod." The voice was clear now, speaking English with a thick Highland accent. "Blood of my blood. You have come home to the mountain." I grabbed the radio. "Who is this? Identify yourself." "I am Angus MacLeod, Chief of Clan MacLeod, Guardian of the Highland Peaks. You walk in my domain now, kinsman." The voice was impossible. My radio was a modern digital unit with encrypted channels. No one could just break in and start talking. But there it was, clear as if the speaker was standing right next to me. "This is Ranger McLeod requesting immediate assistance. Someone is interfering with emergency communications." Silence. Then laughter. Deep, booming laughter that seemed to echo from the peaks themselves. "Emergency, is it? Aye, that it is. Your people are in grave danger, Samuel McLeod, but not from the storm. The wind picked up again, and through the swirling snow, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Movement on the peak above me. Figures in long cloaks moving along ridges that should have been impossible to climb. Even with modern gear, those rock faces were technical climbs. No one could just walk across them. But these figures were moving like they were on flat ground. And there were a lot of them. I counted at least a dozen figures moving on the peaks around me. They seemed to glide across the rock faces, unaffected by the howling wind that was nearly knocking me off my feet. Through the snow, I caught glimpses of what looked like flowing tartans, clan colors whipping in the storm. My radio crackled again. Find your people quickly, kinsman. They have trespassed on sacred ground. The mountain grows angry. What people? Where are they? Follow the ancient path. But know this, only one of Highland blood may pass the tests that await. Your companions, they may not see the dawn. The transmission cut to static. I tried calling base but got nothing. The storm was interfering with everything now, the ancient path. I looked around and realized the worn track I'd been following was getting clearer, more defined. Stone steps had been carved into the steepest sections, handholds cut into the cliff faces. This wasn't a hiking trail, it was something much older. I followed it upward, fighting panic with every step. The missing climbers were somewhere up here, and if the weather didn't kill them, something else might. That's when I found the tartan. A piece of wool cloth, maybe 18 inches long, snagged on a sharp outcrop of granite. The weave was tight and traditional, red and green with thin black lines. McLeod clan colors. I'd seen the S.A. Me pattern in my grandfather's old photo albums. But this fabric was fresh, recently torn. The edges weren't weathered or faded. Someone wearing McLeod tartan had passed this way within the last few hours. The problem was I was the only McLeod on this mountain, and I was wearing a standard ranger uniform. I stuffed the cloth into my pack and kept climbing. The path led around a sharp bend, and suddenly I was looking at something that shouldn't exist. A stone shelter built into the cliff face. Not a natural cave, this was constructed. Fitted stone blocks, arched doorway, carved lintels, and above the entrance, carved deep into the granite, was the McLeod clan crest. Fresh voices echoed from inside. Human voices. Scared voices. "Hello?" I called out. "Park Service. Is anyone in there?" "Thank God." It was a woman's voice. "Dr. Campbell. We're trapped. The entrance sealed itself." I ran to the doorway, but there was no door, just an open arch leading into darkness. "What do you mean sealed? I can see the entrance." "There's a stone wall here. We can't get out. We've been trapped for hours." I shined my flashlight into the shelter. It was empty. No people. No equipment. Just bare stone walls covered in carved Celtic symbols and clan genealogies going back centuries. But I could hear them. 4 voices, clear as day, coming from inside the empty chamber. "Where are you exactly?" I called. "In the stone hut, about 20 feet deep. There's a spring in the back and symbols all over the walls." I was looking at the same space they were describing, but from my side, it was completely empty. "Can you see my flashlight?" "What flashlight? It's completely dark in here." We were in the same place, but somehow we weren't. My radio came alive with that Highland accent again. "The mountain has them now, kinsman. They entered the sacred chamber without permission, without understanding. They are caught between the worlds until judgment is passed." "What judgment? What do you want?" "You know the old ways, Samuel McLeod. Your grandfather taught you. A champion must sit, and for them, face the tests of the clan, prove their worthiness to walk on sacred ground." The pieces clicked together. My grandfather's stories, the Highland warriors who followed Scottish families to America, the tests of worthiness, the sacred places that had to be protected. And if I refuse, then they remain caught between the worlds, forever. I looked into the empty chamber where 4 people were trapped in a space I could see but not enter. The temperature was dropping fast. Even if they had shelter, hypothermia would kill them before morning. "What tests?" I asked. The wind died again. Complete silence. Then from the peaks around me came the sound of bagpipes. Not wind noise this time, real pipes, playing a tune I recognized from my childhood, a Highland battle song. The figures on the ridges were moving closer. I could see them clearly now, men in full Highland dress, carrying traditional weapons. They moved down the cliff faces like they were walking on level ground, tartan cloaks streaming behind them. As they got closer, I could make out details that made my hands shake. These weren't costumes or reenactors. The weapons were real steel, battle-worn and ancient. The faces under the Highland bonnets were weathered and scarred. And their eyes held the cold fire of men who had died fighting and weren't done yet. The leader stepped forward. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with a gray beard braided with silver rings. His tartan was the deep red and forest green of Clan MacLeod, and across his back was a claymore sword that looked like it could split a man in half. "I am Angus MacLeod," he said in that voice I'd heard on the radio. "Chief of Clan MacLeod, died at Culloden in 1746. I have watched over our people for more than 2 centuries. He gestured to the warriors around him. "These are my clan brothers. We followed our desk, Endance, to this new land. We guard the sacred places. We test the worthiness of those who would trespass." "The missing climbers," I said. "They're not Highland. They didn't know about any sacred places." "Ignorance is no excuse. They entered the chamber of our ancestors. They disturbed the resting place of clan spirits. The mountain demanded justice." "What kind of justice?" "Trial by combat, tests of clan honor, ancient ways for ancient crimes." Angus drew his sword. The blade sang as it cleared the scabbard, ringing like a bell in the thin mountain air. "You are blood of our blood, Samuel MacLeod. You may stand champion for the trespassers. Face the trials in their place. But know this, failure means death for you all." I looked at the sword, then at the dozen Highland warriors surrounding me, then at the empty chamber where 4 people were trapped between worlds. 16 years of mountain rescue training. 6 years in the Navy. All of it useless against supernatural clan justice from the 18th century. But I was a MacLeod. My grandfather had taught me the stories, the clan history, the old ways. If these spirits were bound by Highland tradition, then maybe tradition could save us all. "I accept," I said. "I stand champion for the trespassers. What are the trials?" Angus MacLeod smiled. It was not a comforting expression. 3 tests, kinsman. Trial of strength, trial of courage, trial of wisdom. Pass all 3 and your people go free. Fail anyone." He didn't need to finish. The howling wind and the supernatural storm made the consequences clear enough. The Highland warriors spread out in a circle around us. The bagpipes played louder, and somewhere in the distance I heard thunder that sounded suspiciously like war drums. "The first trial," Angus MacLeod announced, gesturing to a flat area between 2 stone cairns. "Strength of arm, as our ancestors proved their worth in the Highland Games." A younger warrior stepped forward, rolling a massive boulder into the circle. It had to weigh at least 300 pounds. Without apparent effort, he lifted it overhead and threw it 20 feet. "Your turn, kinsman." I stared at the boulder. I was in good shape. Mountain rescue work keeps you strong, but this was impossible. No human could lift that much weight. Then I remembered something my grandfather used to say. The Highland strength comes not from the body alone, but from the clan spirits that flow through MacLeod blood. I approached the boulder. As my hands touched the stone, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Warmth spread through my arms and chest. Not my warmth, something older, stronger. The strength of generations of Highland warriors flowing through me. I lifted the boulder. It felt light as a football. I threw it 30 feet. The clan warriors nodded approval. Angus MacLeod's expression remained stern. The second trial. Courage in the face of death, as our ancestors faced the English at Culloden. The Highland warriors stepped back, leaving me alone in the circle. The storm intensified until I could barely see. Snow and sleet whipped around me like razor blades. The temperature dropped so fast my breath came out in white clouds. Then the real test began. The cliff face in front of me cracked open like a door. From the opening came sounds that made my soul want to run, screams of dying men, clash of weapons, cannon fire. The smell of gunpowder and blood filled the air. "Walk through the battle," Angus commanded. "Face the death of our clan. Do not run, no matter what you see." I stepped toward the opening. As I crossed the threshold, the world changed. I was standing on a Scottish moor. It was April 16th, 1746. The Battle of Culloden was raging around me. Highland warriors were dying by the hundreds as English cannon tore through their ranks. The ground was soaked with blood. But this wasn't just a vision. I could feel the mud under my feet, smell the acrid smoke, hear the dying cries of clansmen, and men I somehow recognized, distant ancestors, warriors who had given their lives for Highland freedom. A cannonball screamed past my head. An English soldier charged me with a bayonet. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to find cover, to get away from the slaughter. But I held my ground. I walked forward through the battle, past the dying warriors, past the smoking cannon, past the English cavalry cutting down fleeing Highlanders. I walked until I reached the center of the carnage, where Angus MacLeod himself lay dying, his sword still clutched in his hand. "Well done, kinsman," the dying chief whispered. "You have faced the darkness that claimed us all." The battlefield faded. I was back in the mountain circle, surrounded by the Highland spirits. But now I understood. These weren't just clan ancestors. They were the souls of warriors who had died defending their people, their way of life, their sacred places. "The final trial," Angus said. "Wisdom. Answer truly, and all are saved. Answer falsely, and all are damned." He stepped closer, those ancient eyes boring into mine. Why do the old ways matter in this new world? Why should the sacred places be protected when men no longer believe in the spirits that guard them? I thought about my grandfather's stories, about the way I'd dismissed them as superstition, about the modern world that had no place for ancient wisdom. But I also thought about the 4 people trapped between worlds, depending on my answer. "The old ways matter," I said slowly, "because they connect us to something greater than ourselves. The sacred places need protection because they hold the wisdom of those who came before. In a world that's always changing, always racing forward, we need anchors to who we are and where we came from." I paused, feeling the weight of generations watching me. The spirits guard these places not out of anger, but out of love. Love for their descendants, love for the land that shaped them, love for the traditions that defined them. Take away the sacred places, forget the old ways, and we lose the power. It of ourselves that makes us more than just consumers, workers, people who are born, live, and die without meaning. Angus MacLeod studied me for a long moment. The other warriors waited in absolute silence. Then, slowly, the chief smiled. "Wisdom indeed, Samuel MacLeod. You understand what your grandfather tried to teach you. The old ways are not chains to bind us to the past. They are roots to keep us grounded while we grow toward the future." He raised his sword and touched my shoulders with the blade. "I name you guardian of the mountain, keeper of the sacred places, bridge between the old ways and the new. The clan spirits will watch over you, and you will watch over them." The stone chamber behind me blazed with sudden light. The 4 missing climbers stumbled out, confused but alive. "Sam!" Dr. Campbell rushed toward me. "How did you find us? We were trapped in there for hours." But when I turned to introduce her to Angus MacLeod, he was gone. All the Highland warriors had vanished. Only the stone cairns remained, ancient markers of a sacred trust I now understood. The storm was clearing. Through breaking clouds, I could see Jenny's helicopter approaching with the rescue team. But I knew the real rescue had already happened, and it had nothing to do with modern equipment or emergency procedures. The official report was simple enough. 4 climbers had taken shelter in a natural cave during a sudden storm. Ranger MacLeod had located them using standard search procedures. Everyone rescued, no injuries, case closed. I never mentioned the Highland warriors, never talked about the trials or the ancient chamber that existed in two worlds at once. Who would believe it? But things changed after that night. I started studying my family history, really studying it, not just listening to grandfather's stories. Turns out the MacLeods had been more than simple farmers and mill workers. Some of the early settlers had been minor Highland chiefs, warriors who had fled Scotland after Culloden. They'd brought more than just their families to America. They'd brought their sacred responsibilities. I found evidence of similar incidents throughout the Appalachian chain. Cherokee stories about pale spirits in the mountains that matched Highland clan descriptions. Unexplained disappearances that followed patterns of supernatural judgment. Sacred sites that showed signs of both Native American and Celtic spiritual activity. The old ways hadn't died out. They'd just gone underground, waiting for someone who remembered. I took my new role seriously, started warning climbers about respecting the mountain, posted signs at trailheads about sacred sites and traditional restrictions. Most people thought I was just being overly cautious about environmental protection, but some understood. Other families with Highland blood, Cherokee tribal members who recognized a fellow guardian, people who still believed that some places demanded respect, not just recreation. Jenny Morrison never talked about what her helicopter instruments recorded that night, but she started carrying a small piece of tartan in her flight kit. For luck, she said. Dr. Campbell published a paper about unique acoustic properties in certain Appalachian peaks that could create remarkable auditory phenomena under specific weather conditions. She never mentioned voices speaking Gaelic or the taste of Highland mist in November snow. The other climbers went back to their normal lives, but they all sent me Christmas cards every year, and they all made donations to Highland cultural preservation societies. Funny how that worked out. As for me, I stayed on the mountain. 16 years became 20, then 25. I never married. My grandfather had been wrong about that. Some MacLeods were meant to be guardians, not family men. But I wasn't alone. On clear nights, when the moon was full and the wind was just right, I could see them on the distant peaks, Highland warrior, as keeping watch, protecting the sacred places, maintaining the old agreements between the living and the dead. Sometimes, when lost hikers needed finding or storms threatened to turn deadly, I'd hear Angus MacLeod's voice on my radio. Just a few words of guidance, always in that thick Highland accent, always ending the same way. Hold fast, kinsman. Hold fast. The mountain still tests people. Not everyone who enters the sacred places comes out unchanged. But now there's someone watching, someone who understands the rules, someone who can stand between the ancient justice and the modern world, someone who knows that some traditions are worth keeping, even in an age that's forgotten how to listen to the wisdom of the past. The Highland spirits are still up there, guardians of the peaks, protectors of the sacred places. And as long as there are MacLeods on the mountain, they'll never be forgotten again. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I'd failed those trials. If I'd run from the battle or lifted the wrong answer or refused to lift the stone. But I don't dwell on it. The old ways taught me that courage means facing the unknown, wisdom means accepting responsibility, and strength means carrying burdens that others can't see. Besides, I have work to do. The mountain is always watching, and there are always people who need guidance to find their way home. Hold fast. That's what it means to be MacLeod. My name is Rebecca Caldwell, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 12 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old mountains had to offer. I was wrong. I worked mostly with the old buildings and historical stuff in Cades Cove. It's a beautiful place where mountain families used to live before the park was created back in the 1930s. My job is to take care of the old cabins, barns, and churches that are still standing. I also help visitors understand what life was like for the families who lived here. My own great-grandmother used to tell me stories about the old days before the park. Her family was one of the ones who had to leave their home when the government made this place into a national park. She always said it was for the greater good, but I could hear the sadness in her voice when she talked about it. The mountains in October are something special. The leaves turn every color you can imagine: red, orange, yellow, gold. The morning fog rolls through the valleys like a soft gray blanket. It's peaceful most of the time, but there's something about the fog that makes everything feel different. Older, like the mountains are remembering things from long ago. I never believed in ghost stories. My great-grandmother used to tell me about something called a bone whistler, supposedly a spirit that made music from bones to call lost children. I always figured it was just an old mountain tale, something to scare kids into staying close to home. That was before October 13th, 1988. It started with a school group from Gatlinburg Elementary. 25 kids and 3 teachers came to learn about mountain life. I was giving them the usual tour, showing them how people used to grind corn, churn butter, and live without electricity. The kids were having fun, running around the old John Oliver cabin and pretending to be pioneer children. Mrs. Henderson, one of the teachers, came up to me looking worried. "Miss Caldwell," she said, "some of the children are saying they hear music coming from inside the cabin, flute music." I smiled and told her it was probably just the wind blowing through the old logs. These cabins are over 150 years old, and they make all kinds of sounds. But I walked over to check anyway. That's when I heard it too. It was faint, like someone playing a wooden flute very softly. The melody was sad and beautiful, the kind of tune that makes you think of lonesome nights and missing someone you love. It seemed to be coming from inside the cabin, but I had the key, and I knew the building was locked up tight. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The music stopped right away. The cabin was empty, just like it was supposed to be. Old furniture, farming tools, a big stone fireplace. Nothing unusual. But something felt wrong. The air inside was warm, even though it was cool outside, and there was a smell. Not bad, just different. Like dried herbs and wood smoke, as if someone had been cooking in the fireplace recently. I checked every corner of the cabin. Nothing. I told Mrs. Henderson it must have been the wind, and we continued the tour. But I kept thinking about that music. I'd heard mountain fiddle tunes before, but this was different. Older, somehow. After the school group left, I went back to the cabin alone. I've got keys to all the historic buildings, and part of my job is to check them regularly for damage or break-ins. I walked around the outside first, looking for any signs that someone might have gotten in. That's when I found the first bone whistle. It was sitting on the windowsill, carved from what looked like a bird bone. Someone had made holes in it, like a real flute. The carving was beautiful. Tiny symbols that looked almost like Cherokee writing "C-to-you" overed the surface. I picked it up carefully. It was still warm. My heart started beating faster. Someone had been here, and recently. But how had they gotten inside? And why leave the whistle where I would find it? I unlocked the cabin again and went inside. This time I looked more carefully, checking places I might have missed before. In the loft area, where families used to sleep, I found something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the dust. Small ones, like a child might make. They led from the ladder to the window and back again. But here's the thing. I had swept this cabin clean just 3 days ago. No one had been inside since then except me. The footprints were fresh. I followed them around the loft, my flashlight beam dancing over the old wooden boards. They stopped at a corner where the roof slanted down low. Someone had been kneeling there, and carved into the wood, so faint I almost missed it, were words. "We're still here." My hands were shaking as I took pictures with my camera. I'd been working in this park for 12 years, and I'd never seen anything like this. Part of me wanted to call my supervisor right away, but I knew how it would sound. Park ranger claims ghosts are leaving messages in historic buildings? I'd probably get transferred to desk duty. I decided to keep quiet and investigate on my own first. I locked up the cabin and went home, but I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints and that beautiful bone whistle. That night I called my great-grandmother. She was 93 and still sharp as a tack. I told her about the bone whistle and asked if she remembered the old stories. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice getting soft and sad. "I hoped you'd never have to deal with that. The bone whistler isn't just a story. It's the sound of children who never got to grow up, who never got to go home." She told me that when families were forced to leave their land for the park, some children got lost in the confusion. They wandered into the woods and were never found. According to the old stories, their spirits still. Elle walked the mountains playing music to call other children to come and play with them forever. But Grandmama, I said, that's just a legend, right? There was a long pause. Then she said, Becca, there are things in these mountains older than you or me, older than the stories we tell about them. You be careful, you hear? After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen looking at the bone whistle. Under the bright electric light, I could see the symbols more clearly. They definitely looked like Cherokee writing, but I couldn't read them. I had a friend who might be able to help. The next morning, I drove to Cherokee, North Carolina to see Joseph Ross. He was an elder in the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and had helped us with cultural programs at the park before. Joseph knew more about Cherokee history and traditions than anyone I'd ever met. I found him at the Tribal Museum working on a display about traditional crafts. When I showed him the bone whistle, his face changed. All the friendliness went out of his eyes, replaced by something that looked like fear. Where did you find this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I told him about the cabin and the footprints. He turned the whistle over in his hands, reading the symbols. This says, come play with us, he said finally. But Becca, this isn't Cherokee work. The symbols are right, but they're carved by someone who learned them, not someone who grew up knowing them, like a child copying letters without understanding what they mean. He handed the whistle back to me like it was made of fire. You need to be very careful. These are not Cherokee spirits you're dealing with. These are the lost ones. Children who died when the families were moved out. They don't understand that they're dead. They just want someone to play with them. Are they dangerous? I asked. Joseph was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Bah, they don't mean to hurt anyone. But the dead don't understand the living world anymore. If they try to take you with them... He didn't finish the sentence. I drove back to Cades Cove, with my mind spinning. Part of me still couldn't believe I was taking this seriously. But the bone whistle was real. The footprints were real. And Joseph Ross didn't scare easily. I decided to stake out the Oliver cabin that night. If someone was playing pranks, I'd catch them. If it was something else, well, I'd deal with that when it happened. I parked my truck behind the visitor center after closing time and walked to the cabin in the dark. October nights in the mountains get cold, and the fog was starting to roll in from the valleys. I found a good hiding spot behind an old apple tree where I could watch the cabin without being seen. For 2 hours, nothing happened. I was starting to feel pretty foolish, sitting in the cold watching an empty building. Then I heard the music. It was the same sad, beautiful tune I'd heard before, but this time it was coming from behind the cabin. I crept closer, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. In the moonlight, I could see someone sitting on the back steps of the cabin, a small figure, child-sized, playing a bone flute. The music was so pretty it made me want to cry. I moved closer, trying to get a better look. The figure was wearing old-fashioned clothes, a simple dress that came down to her ankles like girls wore a long time ago. Her hair was long and dark, braided with what looked like wildflowers. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. I stepped on a twig and it snapped loud as a gunshot in the quiet night. The music stopped. The little girl turned to look at me, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. She was pale as moonlight and so thin I could almost see through her, but her eyes were the worst part. They were old eyes, sadder than any child's eyes should ever be. "Hello," she said, her voice soft as a whisper. "Do you want to play with us?" I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. This wasn't possible. There was a dead child sitting on the steps of a 150-year-old cabin, asking me to play. She stood up slowly, and I could see that her feet didn't quite touch the ground. She was floating, just barely, like she was underwater. "We've been waiting so long for someone to play with," she said. "It gets lonely here. Won't you stay?" She held out her hand to me, and I could see right through it. That's when I ran. I turned and ran as fast as I could, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the noise I was making. Behind me, I could hear the bone flute playing again, but now there were other instruments too. A whole orchestra of bone whistles playing that same sad song. I made it to my truck and drove home without looking back. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. When I got home, I called in sick to work. I needed time to think about what I'd seen. Because I had seen it, hadn't I? It wasn't my imagination or a trick of the moonlight. There had been a dead child sitting on those steps, playing music on a bone flute. The next morning, I forced myself to go back to the cabin. In the daylight, everything looked normal. Just an old log cabin where mountain families used to live. But when I walked around to the back steps, I found something that made my stomach drop. More bone whistles. A whole pile of them, sitting where the little girl had been. And carved into the wooden steps, in that same childish handwriting, were more words. Please don't leave us alone. I gathered up all the bone whistles and took them back to my office. There were 12 of them, all different sizes, all carved with the same Cherokee symbols that meant, come play with us. But it was what I found that afternoon that really scared me. I was going through old park records trying to find any mention of missing some children from the 1930s when Floyd Jenkins knocked on my door. Floyd worked maintenance for the park and had been here almost as long as I had. "Becca," he said, "I need to tell you something, but you're going to think I'm crazy." "Try me," I said. Floyd sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. He was a big man, tough as nails, but he looked scared. "Last night I was driving past Cades Cove around midnight," he said. "Had to check on a water line break near the Methodist church. When I drove past the Oliver cabin, I saw lights inside. Looked like candlelight, flickering and dancing around. My heart started beating faster." "Did you check it out?" "I tried to," Floyd said, "but when I got close to the cabin, I heard children laughing and playing inside. Sounded like a whole bunch of kids having a party. So I figured maybe some teenagers had broken in, you know? I was going to run them off." He paused and wiped sweat from his forehead, even though it wasn't hot in my office. I unlocked the door and went inside, but the place was empty. No kids, no candles, nothing. But I could still hear them laughing like they were hiding somewhere I couldn't see them. And then one of them called out to me. "What did they say?" Floyd's voice dropped to almost a whisper. A little girl's voice said, "Come play with us, Mr. Floyd. We know lots of fun games." But there was nobody there, Becca. Nobody I could see. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made my blood turn to ice. Another bone whistle, just like the ones I'd found. "This was sitting on the table when I turned my flashlight on it," he said. "Like someone had just put it there for me to find." I told Floyd about what I'd seen and showed him the other bone whistles. His face went white when he realized I'd seen the same things he had. "What do you think they want?" he asked. I thought about the little girl's sad eyes, about the words carved into the wood, about my great-grandmother's stories. "I think they want what any child wants," I said. "They want someone to play with. Them. They want not to be alone." But even as I said it, I knew it was more complicated than that. The dead don't understand the world of the living. If they tried to make me play with them forever, I might end up just as lost as they were. That night, I did something I probably should have done from the beginning. I called Joseph Ross and told him everything. "You need to stay away from that place," he said. "These spirits are getting stronger. The more attention you pay to them, the more real they become in our world." "But what if they hurt someone?" I asked. "What if some kid wanders off during a school tour and these spirits try to take them?" Joseph was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There might be a way to help them, but it's dangerous, and you'd have to be very brave." "Tell me." "The Cherokee have ceremonies for helping lost spirits find their way to the spirit world, but you'd have to get close to them, close enough to perform the ritual. And there's no guarantee they'd want to leave. They've been waiting here for 50 years. I thought about the little girl's face, about how sad and lonely she looked, about all the children who might have gotten lost when their families were forced to leave their homes. "I have to try," I said. "Then I'll help you," Joseph said. But we do this right, according to the old ways. Meet me at the cabin tomorrow night, just after sunset. And Becca, bring tobacco and cornmeal. We're going to need all the help we can get." After I hung up the phone, I sat in my kitchen looking at the pile of bone whistles. 12 little instruments, carved by the hands of lost children who just wanted someone to play with them. Tomorrow night, I was going to try to help them find their way home. The next day dragged by like a week. I couldn't concentrate on my regular work, and every time I looked out the window toward Cade's Cove, I felt like someone was watching me. Around 3 o'clock, Floyd came to my office looking even more worried than before. "Becca, we got a problem," he said. "I went to check the visitor center, Axe bathrooms this morning, and I found something you need to see." He led me to the women's restroom. On the mirror, written in what looked like a child's handwriting, were the words, "Why won't you play with us? We're not scary." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the words were written on the inside of the mirror, like someone had written them from behind the glass. "How is that even possible?" I asked. Floyd shook his head. "I don't know, but it gets worse. Look at this." In each of the bathroom stalls, someone had left small gifts, wildflowers braided into crowns like the kind little girls make when they're playing dress-up, pretty stones arranged in careful patterns, and in the last stall, a child's hair ribbon, faded and old-fashioned. "They're trying to be nice," Floyd said, "like they're bringing us presents." I picked up one of the flower crowns. The flowers were fresh, but they were varieties that only bloomed in spring. It was October. These flowers shouldn't exist anymore. "Floyd, has anyone else seen these things?" "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. We get hundreds of visitors every day. What am I supposed to tell them when they ask why there are ghost flowers in the bathroom?" I was quiet for a minute, thinking. Then I said, "Close this bathroom for repairs. Put up a sign that says the plumbing is broken. We'll figure out what to do after tonight." Floyd nodded and went to get his tools. I stayed behind, looking at the gifts the children had left. They were beautiful, made with the kind of care that comes from love. These spirits weren't trying to scare anyone. They just wanted friends. But as I stood there, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Soft giggling, like children playing hide and seek. It was coming from inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the bathroom wall and listened. The giggling got louder, and I would hear whispering too. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like several children talking excitedly about something. Then one voice became clear. "She's listening. She wants to play." I jerked away from the wall so fast I almost fell over. The voices stopped immediately, like someone had turned off a radio. I spent the rest of the day trying to stay busy, but my mind kept wandering back to what Joseph had said about the ceremony. What if it didn't work? What if the children got angry when we tried to send them away? What if they decided to take me with them instead? As the sun started to set, I gathered up the tobacco and cornmeal Joseph had asked for. I also brought a flashlight, my camera, and a Cherokee prayer Joseph had taught me over the phone. I wasn't sure I'd remember it right, but I had to try. Joseph was waiting for me by the Oliver cabin when I arrived. He had a small leather bag with him and several eagle feathers. His face was serious, more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Once we start the ceremony, there's no going back. The spirits will know what we're trying to do." "I'm sure," I said, though my voice shook a little. Joseph nodded and began laying out a circle of cornmeal around the cabin steps. As he worked, he spoke in Cherokee, words I didn't understand, but that sounded old and powerful. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, and the fog started rolling in. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees in just a few minutes, and the air felt thick and heavy. "They're coming," Joseph whispered. That's when I heard the music. It started with just one bone whistle, playing that same sad melody I'd heard before. But then other instruments joined in, more whistles, what sounded like tiny drums and voices, children's voices, singing words I couldn't understand. The music was coming from all around us, like we were surrounded by an invisible orchestra. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Can you see them? I asked Joseph. He nodded grimly. They're everywhere. I looked harder, trying to see what he saw. At first there was nothing but fog and shadows. Then slowly shapes began to form in the mist. Children, dozens of them standing in a circle around the cabin. They were all dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and they all had that same pale, translucent look I'd seen before. Some were as young as 5 or 6. Others looked to be maybe 12 or 13. And they were all staring at us with those sad, ancient eyes. The little girl I'd seen before stepped forward. She was holding a bone whistle that looked different from the others. Bigger, more elaborate, covered in intricate carvings. "Why do you want to send us away?" she asked. Her voice was so sad it made my heart ache. "We just want to play. We just want friends." Joseph stepped into the circle of cornmeal and began to speak in Cherokee. His voice was strong and confident, but I could see sweat on his forehead. The children listened, their heads tilted like confused puppies. Some of them started to look scared. "What is he saying?" the little girl asked me. I looked at Joseph, and he nodded for me to answer. "He's telling you that it's time to go home," I said. "Your real home, where your families are waiting for you." The little girl shook her head violently. "This is our home. We've always lived here. Our families are gone." "No," I said gently. "Your families aren't gone. They're waiting for you in the spirit world. But you got lost when you died, and you've been stuck here ever since." Around the circle, the other children began to cry. Not loud sobbing, but quiet tears that gleamed like silver in the moonlight. "We don't want to be alone," a little boy said. "If we leave, we'll be alone forever." "You won't be alone," I promised. "You'll be with your families, your real families, who love you and miss you." Joseph continued the ceremony, sprinkling tobacco on the ground and waving the eagle feathers in the 4 directions. The air around us began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. That's when things got scary. Some of the children didn't want to go. They started moving closer to us, their faces changing from sad to desperate. "Stay with us," the little girl cried. "You can play with us forever. We know such fun games." She reached out to grab my hand, and where her fingers touched my skin, I felt a cold so intense it burned. I could see frost forming on my arm. "Don't let them touch you," Joseph shouted. "They'll try to pull you into their world." But there were so many of them, and they were coming from all sides. I found myself in the middle of a crowd of ghost children, all reaching for me, all begging me to stay and play with them. "We'll take good care of you," a boy whispered in my ear. "You'll never be sad or lonely again." His breath was like ice against my neck. I could feel my strength draining away, like he was pulling the life out of me. I tried to remember the Cherokee prayer Joseph had taught me, but my mind was going fuzzy. The world was starting to look different, more colorful, more alive. I could see the cabin as it had been when families lived here, with smoke coming from the chimney and laundry hanging on the line. "That's right," the little girl said. "You can see our world now. Isn't it beautiful? Stay with us." I was almost gone. I could feel myself slipping away from the real world, becoming like them. But then I heard Joseph's voice, strong and commanding, speaking words that cut through the fog in my mind. He was holding up a bundle of burning sage, and the smoke made the children back away from me. For a moment, I could think clearly again. "You have to choose," I called out to them. "You can come with us to the spirit world, or you can stay here forever, alone and lost." The little girl looked at me with those ancient eyes. "Will our families really be there?" "Yes," I said. "I promise." She looked around at the other children, and I could see her making a decision. Slowly, she trying to see what he saw. At first, there was nothing but fog and shadows. Then, slowly, shapes began to form in the mist. Children, dozens of them, standing in a circle around the cabin. They were all dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and they all had that same pale, translucent look I'd seen before. Some were as young as 5 or 6. Others looked to be maybe 12 or 13. And they were all staring at us with those sad, ancient eyes. The little girl I'd seen before stepped forward. She was holding a bone whistle that looked different from the others, bigger, more elaborate, covered in intricate carvings. "Why do you want to send us away?" she asked. Her voice was so sad it made my heart ache. "We just want to play. We just want friends." Joseph stepped into the circle of cornmeal and began to speak in Cherokee. His voice was strong and confident, but I could see sweat on his forehead. The children listened, their heads tilted like confused puppies. Some of them started to look scared. "What is he saying?" the little girl asked me. I looked at Joseph, and he nodded for me to answer. "He's telling you that it's time to go home," I said. "Your real home, where your families are waiting for you." The little girl shook her head violently. "This is our home. We've always lived here. Our families are gone." "No," I said gently. "Your families aren't gone. They're waiting for you in the spirit world. But you got lost when you died, and you've been stuck here ever since." Around the circle, the other children began to cry. Not loud sobbing, but quiet tears that gleamed like silver in the moonlight. "We don't want to be alone," a little boy said. "If we leave, we'll be alone forever." "You won't be alone," I promised. "You'll be with your families, your real families, who love you and miss you." Joseph continued the ceremony, sprinkling tobacco on the ground and waving the eagle feathers in the 4 directions. The air around us began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. That's when things got scary. Some of the children didn't want to go. They started moving closer to us, their faces changing from sad to desperate. "Stay with us," the little girl cried. "You can play with us forever. We know such fun games." She reached out to grab my hand, and where her fingers touched my skin, I felt a cold so intense it burned. I could see frost forming on my arm. "Don't let them touch you," Joseph shouted. "They'll try to pull you into their world." But there were so many of them, and they were coming from all sides. I found myself in the middle of a crowd of ghost children, all reaching for me, all begging me to stay and play with them. "We'll take good care of you," a boy whispered in my ear. "You'll never be sad or lonely again." His breath was like ice against my neck. I could feel my strength draining away, like he was pulling the life out of me. I tried to remember the Cherokee prayer Joseph had taught me, but my mind was going fuzzy. The world was starting to look different, more colorful, more alive. I could see the cabin as it had been when families lived here, with smoke coming from the chimney and laundry hanging on the line. "That's right," the little girl said. "You can see our world now. Isn't it beautiful? Stay with us." I was almost gone. I could feel myself slipping away from the real world, becoming like them. But then I heard Joseph's voice, strong and commanding, speaking words that cut through the fog in my mind. He was holding up a bundle of burning sage, and the smoke made the children back away from me. For a moment, I could think clearly again. "You have to choose," I called out to them. "You can come with us to the spirit world, or you can stay here forever, alone and lost." The little girl looked at me with those ancient eyes. "Will our families really be there?" "Yes," I said. "I promise." She looked around at the other children, and I could see her making a decision. Slowly, louder, and I felt the same draining sensation I'd experienced before, but stronger. This spirit wasn't trying to lure me into its world with promises of games and friendship. It was trying to drag me there by force. I could feel my life being pulled out of me. My vision started to blur, and the world began to fade around the edges. In a few more seconds, I'd be as dead as the angry child trapped in Cades Cove forever. That's when I remembered what Mary Ogle had told me. She'd said her daddy built the cabin. The Oliver cabin was built by John Oliver, one of the first settlers in Cades Cove. But if her name was Mary Ogle... "You're not from the 1930s, I gasped out, fighting against the spirit's pull. "You died before then. You died when you were still alive." The music faltered for just a second, and I could see confusion in the spirit's dark eyes. "You died of sickness or accident when your family still lived here," I continued. "That's why you're different from the others. That's why you're so angry. You didn't get forced out with the living families. You were already dead and buried here." "Shut up!" the spirit screamed, but I could tell I was right. The other children got lost when their families were moved out in the 1930s, I said. But you've been here much longer. You've been alone for almost 100 years. Joseph caught on to what I was doing. If this spirit had died in the 1800s, then Cherokee burial ceremonies might not work on it at all. We needed a different approach. "What's your real name?" he called out. The spirit's music stopped entirely. It stared at us with those horrible dark eyes, and for a moment it looked like a lost child again. I don't remember," it whispered. That's when I understood. This spirit had been alone for so long that it had forgotten who it was. It had forgotten its family, its name, everything except the loneliness and its anger. "We can help you remember," I said gently. "But you have to stop trying to hurt us." The spirit slowly shrank back down to child size. The darkness around it didn't go away, but it stopped growing. "I don't want to be alone anymore," it said, and now it just sounded like a scared kid. Joseph began speaking in Cherokee again, but these were different words. Not the ceremony for sending spirits away, but prayers for lost souls who had forgotten their way home. "Tell us what you remember," I said to the spirit. "Even little things. What did your family call you? What games did you like to play?" The spirit thought hard, its face scrunched up with concentration. My mama used to sing to me. A song about mockingbirds." "That's good," Joseph said encouragingly. "What else?" "I had a dog, a little brown dog named... The spirit's face lit up with joy. "Buster! His name was Buster!" As the spirit remembered more about its life, the darkness around it began to fade. It was still transparent, still obviously dead, but it didn't look angry anymore. "My name was Thomas," it said suddenly. "Thomas Oliver. I was John Oliver's boy." That meant this spirit had been dead for over 150 years. No wonder it was so confused and angry. It had been alone in these mountains since before the Civil War. "Thomas," I said, "your family has been waiting for you for a very long time. They're in the spirit world, and they want you to come home." "But what if they don't remember me?" Thomas asked. "I forgot about them. What if they forgot about me too?" Joseph finished his prayers, and another doorway opened in the air. This one was different from the first, softer, older, filled with the kind of light you see just before sunrise. Through the doorway, I could see people waiting. A man who looked like an older version of Thomas, a woman in a long dress, and at their feet, a small brown dog wagging its tail. "Buster!" Thomas cried out, and all the anger and darkness fell away from him like an old coat. He was just a 13-year-old boy again, running toward his family and his dog. The doorway closed behind him, and this time I knew it was really over. Joseph and I stood in the quiet night, exhausted but relieved. The fog was starting to lift, and I could see stars appearing overhead. "How many more do you think are out there?" I asked. "How many other lost spirits in these mountains?" Joseph was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "More than we can help in one lifetime. But tonight, we saved 13 souls. That's something." I looked down at the bone whistle Mary Ogle had given me. In the starlight, I could see that the symbols carved on it had changed. Instead of "come play with us," they now said, "Thank you." That was 37 years ago, and I'm still a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. I retired from active duty in 2010, but I couldn't leave these mountains. There's too much work still to be done. After that night in 1988, I became something different than just a regular park ranger. Word got around, quietly, carefully, that I knew how to deal with unusual situations. Other rangers started coming to me when they found things they couldn't explain. Footprints that appeared overnight in locked buildings. Voices singing old mountain songs where no one should be. Children's toys left in places no children could reach. I worked with Joseph Ross until he passed away in 2003. Before he died, he taught me everything he could about helping lost spirits find their way home. I've used those lessons dozens of times over the years. You see, what we discovered that October night was just the beginning. The Great Smoky Mountains are full of lost souls, not just children from the 1930s displacement, but spirits from every era of these mountains' long history. Cherokee warriors who died far from home, Civil War soldiers who got lost in the wilderness, settlers who perished in harsh winters, mountain families who died in exide, nets, and never found peace. The Park Service doesn't like to talk about it officially, but they know. There's a special phone number that certain rangers can call when they encounter something beyond normal explanation. There's a small team of us now, rangers, tribal elders, historians, and others who understand that these mountains hold more than just trees and wildlife. We've helped over 200 spirits find their way to the other side. Each one has a story. Each one just wanted to go home. The Oliver cabin is peaceful now. We turned it into a memorial for all the displaced families, with plaques that tell their real stories, not just the sanitized version about willing cooperation with park creation, but the truth about families forced to leave homes their ancestors had built with their own hands. But late at night, when the fog rolls through Cades Cove, you can still hear music sometimes, not the sad bone whistles of lost children, but fiddle tunes and mountain songs played by spirits who have found their peace and want to share their joy with the living world. I still have Mary Ogle's bone whistle. It sits on my mantle, and sometimes on quiet evenings I take it down and look at the symbols carved into it. The message changes depending on what's needed. Sometimes it says, "Thank you." Sometimes it says, "Be careful." Once, when a new ranger was about to make a dangerous mistake, it said, "Not that way." Floyd Jenkins retired in 1995, but he still lives near the park. He stops by my house sometimes, and we talk about the things we've seen. He's helped with a few more spirit encounters over the years. Turns out he has a gift for talking to the dead, probably because he's not afraid of them anymore. The bathroom mirror in the visitor center never had writing appear on it again, but every now and then someone finds small gifts in the stalls. Fresh wildflowers, pretty stones, braided grass. The spirits who leave them aren't lost anymore, they're just saying hello. People ask me sometimes if I'm scared, working with ghosts and spirits all the time. The truth is, the dead aren't scary once you understand them. They're just people who got lost on their way home. The really scary things in this world are done by the living. Greed, hatred, the willingness to destroy something beautiful for money or power. The spirits in these mountains protect what they love. They remember when the forests were healthy, when the streams ran clear, when families lived in harmony with the land. They don't want to hurt anyone. They just want to make sure we don't forget the cost of the choices we make. I'm 71 years old now, and I know I don't have many years left. When my time comes, I think I'll probably join the spirits in these mountains. There's still work to be done, still lost souls who need help finding their way home. If you ever visit the Great Smoky Mountains, especially Cades Cove, listen carefully when the fog rolls in. You might hear music, fiddle tunes, mountain songs, or maybe the soft sound of bone whistles carried on the wind. Don't be afraid. Those are just the voices of people who loved this place so much they couldn't bear to leave it, even in death. And if you happen to find a small bone whistle somewhere in the park, carved with symbols you don't recognize, bring it to the ranger station. Ask for Becca Caldwell. I might be retired, but I still answer when the mountains call. Because some promises last forever. And I promised Mary Ogle and Thomas Oliver and all the other lost children that I would help anyone who needed it. The dead keep their promises, and so do I. The bone whistles still play sometimes, but now they play songs of welcome instead of loneliness. They play the music of home. My name is Daniel Fitzgerald, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. Before that, I spent 8 years as a detective with Richmond Police. I'm telling you this because I want you to know I'm not some city guy who gets scared by every shadow in the woods. I've seen dead bodies, caught killers, and walked into dark alleys where most people wouldn't go. I believe in facts, evidence, and what you can prove in court. I never believed in monsters. Not once in my 44 years on this earth. That changed on June 21st, 1977, up at Peaks of Otter in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The morning started normal enough. I was drinking coffee at the visitor center when Sheriff Robert Hayes called. 3 experienced hikers had gone missing from the Sharp Top Trail. The Morrison family, Dad, Mom, and their 20-year-old son Jake. They'd been camping for 2 days and missed their check-in with family back in Lynchburg. Probably just lost track of time, Hayes said over the phone, but the wife's calling every hour. You mind taking a look? I grabbed my gear and headed up the mountain. The Morrison camp was easy to find. They'd set up near Abbott Lake, just like their permit said. But something felt wrong the moment I got out of my truck. The woods were too quiet. In 19 years of working these mountains, I'd never heard silence like that. No birds, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to have packed up and left. The only sound was my boots on the trail and my own breathing. Their campsite looked like a bomb had gone off. The tent was shredded, not cut but torn apart by something with incredible strength. Sleeping bags were scattered everywhere. Their cooler had been crushed flat, and I mean flat, like someone had dropped a car on it. But here's what made my detective brain start working. Their hiking boots were lined up neat as you please next to what used to be their tent. 3 pairs, pointing toward the trail, like they'd taken them off before. Before what? I called for backup and started looking for tracks. What I found made me stop cold. Footprints. Human-shaped, but 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. The depth of them in the soft earth told me whatever made them weighed more than any man I'd ever seen. But the spacing between steps, that was what really got to me. Whatever this thing was, it walked upright and took deliberate, measured steps. I'd seen bear tracks before. These weren't bear tracks. Detective Sarah Connor arrived from the state police around noon. Sarah was good people, smart, thorough, and she didn't rattle easy. When she saw the campsite, her professional mask slipped just a little. "What kind of animal does this?" she asked, picking up a piece of the crushed cooler. "I don't know," I said. "But look at this." I showed her the footprints. She knelt down, measured them with her tape, and took photos from every angle. Good detective work. "Dan," she said quietly, "I've been doing this for 12 years. I've never seen anything like these." We followed the trail of prints into the woods. They led uphill toward the rocky area below Sharp Top Peak. About a quarter-mile from camp, we found Jake Morrison. He was alive, but barely, hiding in a shallow cave, shaking like a leaf, his eyes wide with terror. He'd been there for 2 days, afraid to move. "Where are your parents, Jake?" Sarah asked gently. The kid just pointed deeper into the woods and whispered, "It took them. The thing, it took them both." Then he grabbed my arm with both hands. His grip was strong, desperate. "It's smart," he said. "Smarter than us. It watched us for hours before it moved. I saw it studying us, learning how we acted. Then it came for Dad first because Dad had the gun." I felt something cold crawl up my spine. That animals don't study people. They don't plan attacks based on who's armed. "Jake, what did this thing look like?" "Like a man, but bigger. Much bigger. And it moved through the trees without making a sound. Impossible for something that size, but I saw it." We got Jake down to safety and called in a full search team. But as we waited for help to arrive, I kept looking at those footprints and thinking about what the kid had said. Something smart was up in these mountains, something that studied its prey before it struck. And it was still out there. The search team arrived at dawn the next day. 6 Virginia State Police officers, 4 local deputies, and 2 tracking dogs with their handler. I'd worked with these dogs before. They were good, trained to find people in all kinds of terrain. But when we led them to the Morrison campsite, both dogs went crazy. They whined, backed away from the torn tent, and refused to follow the scent trail. Max, the older German shepherd, actually tucked his tail and tried to hide behind his handler. These were dogs trained to track escaped convicts through swamps. I'd never seen them act scared. "What's wrong with them?" asked Sergeant Mills from the state police. Tom Bradley, the dog handler, looked confused. "I don't know. They're picking up a scent, but it's like It's like they're terrified of it. We tried for an hour to get the dogs to track, but they wouldn't budge. Finally, Tom loaded them back in his truck. In 15 years of doing this, I've never seen them react that way, he told me. Whatever scent they're picking up, every instinct they have is telling them to run from it. So we searched the old-fashioned way. We spread out in a line and started walking through the woods, calling out for Mr. and Mrs. Morrison. The forest was still too quiet. No normal wildlife sounds at all. Around noon, Deputy Garcia found something that made everyone stop talking. "Hey, over here!" We gathered around a small clearing about half a mile from the Morrison camp. In the center was what looked like the remains of the fire campfire, but arranged in a perfect circle of stones. Inside the circle, we found pieces of the Morrisons' clothes, torn and scattered. But it was what we found outside the circle that really got our attention. More footprints, dozens of them, all around the clearing. But these weren't random. They formed a pattern. The thing had walked in a slow circle around the stone ring, over and over again. The depth and spacing of the prints was exactly the same each time. "It's like a ritual," Sarah whispered. I knelt down and studied the prints more carefully. In the soft earth, I could see details I'd missed before. The feet were human-shaped but huge, with long toes that showed claw marks at the tips. But here's what made my blood run cold. In several of the clearest prints, I could see what looked like a heel print, deep and deliberate. This thing walked like a man. "Sergeant Mills," I called out, "you need to see this." Mills was a good cop, 20 years on the force. He'd seen everything from drug busts to murder scenes. But when he looked at those prints, his face went pale. "Those are human feet," he said. "But no human ever made prints that big." "That's what I thought too," I said. "But look at the arrangement. This thing circled this clearing exactly 12 times. I counted. That's not animal behavior." The radio crackled on my belt. It was Tom Bradley calling from his truck down at the road. "Dan, you need to get down here. I'm getting reports of another missing hiker, solo camper up on Flat Top Trail. His car's been in the parking lot for 3 days, but nobody's seen him." I looked at Sarah. 3 days. Same time the Morrisons went missing. We left 2 officers to keep searching and headed down to check on the new missing person report. The hiker's name was Marcus Webb, age 32, from Norfolk. Experienced outdoorsman according to his camping permit. His campsite was 2 miles away on the other side of the mountain. When we got there, we found the same thing: destroyed camp, crushed equipment, and those impossibly large footprints. But this site was different, worse. Webb's tent hadn't just been torn apart. It had been twisted into knots and hung from tree branches 20 feet off the ground. His backpack was split open, and the contents scattered in a straight line leading into the woods, like something had deliberately marked a trail. "It's playing with us," Sarah said. I was about to answer when we heard it. A sound from up in the trees that made every hair on my body stand up. It started low, like a growl, but then rose in pitch until it sounded almost like laughter. Not human laughter. Something else. Something that found our confusion amusing. The sound came from directly above us. We both looked up, scanning the thick canopy of oak and pine. The leaves were so dense we couldn't see more than a few feet up, but I had the absolute certainty that something was up there. Something big. Something watching us. "Did you see it?" Sarah whispered. "No, but it's there." The laughter stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then we heard movement in the branches. Slow, deliberate, like something very heavy was moving from tree to tree without falling. The movement headed deeper into the forest, toward the rocky peaks above. "We need more men," Sarah said. "Whatever this thing is, it's not afraid of us, and it's smart enough to know we're hunting it." I nodded, but I was thinking about something else. The way that laughter had sounded, like it was genuinely amused by our efforts to track it, like it was enjoying the game. As we hiked back down to call for reinforcements, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every few minutes, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I'd turn to look, there was nothing there. Sarah must have felt it too because she kept checking over her shoulder. "Dan," she said as we reached our vehicles, What if Jake Morrison was right? What if this thing really is smart? Smart enough to hunt people like we hunt animals? I didn't want to answer that question, but deep down I was starting to think she was right. And if she was, then we weren't hunting this creature, it was hunting us. By the third day, we had 12 officers searching the mountains. The Virginia State Police had brought in their best tracking equipment, and the FBI was sending a specialist from their behavioral analysis unit. This was no longer just a missing persons case. It was something that nobody wanted to say out loud. But the creature was ahead of us every step of the way. On Wednesday morning, we found Officer Martinez's patrol car at the bottom of a ravine. The car had been flipped upside down and crushed like a tin can. Martinez was alive, barely, but he had 3 broken ribs and couldn't remember how he'd ended up in the ravine. I was parked at the overlook, monitoring radio traffic, he told us from his hospital bed. I saw something moving in the trees, something huge. I got out to investigate, and the next thing I remember is waking up in the wreckage. The doctor said he had a concussion and possible internal injuries. But what worried me was the look in his eyes, the same terrified look I'd seen in Jake Morrison. "Martinez," I said gently, "did you get a good look at what you saw?" He nodded slowly. It walked like a man, but it was at least 10 feet tall, covered in dark hair. But its eyes... He shuddered. Its eyes looked human, intelligent, like it was thinking, planning. "What was the last thing you remember before the accident?" It wasn't an accident. His voice was barely a whisper. The thing picked up my patrol car and threw it down the ravine, with me inside. The FBI specialist arrived that afternoon. Agent Rebecca Walsh was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for solving impossible cases. She spent an hour studying our evidence, the photos of the footprints, the destroyed campsites, witness statements from Jake Morrison and Officer Martinez. "You're dealing with something that displays sophisticated hunting behavior," she told us. "It studies its targets, plans its attacks, and adapts its tactics based on resistance. The fact that it went after the armed individual first shows tactical thinking." "So, what are we hunting?" asked Sergeant Mills. Walsh looked uncomfortable. "Officially, unknown predator, possibly an escaped exotic animal or someone in an elaborate disguise. Unofficially," she paused, "I've seen similar patterns in 3 other cases over the past 5 years. Different states, different circumstances, but the same systematic hunting behavior." "What happened in those cases?" "They were all closed without resolution. The attacks stopped as suddenly as they started, and no bodies were ever recovered." That evening, Sarah and I decided to stake out the area where most of the encounters had occurred. We set up camp in a small clearing with good sight lines in all directions. The plan was to stay awake in shifts and see if we could spot this thing. At 2 a.m., Sarah shook me awake. "Dan, we've got company." I was instantly alert. Sarah was pointing toward the tree line about 50 yards away. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed that one of the shadows between the trees was too tall, too broad to be a tree trunk. It was standing perfectly still, watching us. "How long has it been there?" I whispered. "At least 20 minutes. It hasn't moved once." I reached for my radio to call for backup, but Sarah grabbed my wrist. "Don't," she said. "Look at the other side of the clearing." I turned my head slowly. Another shadow stood at the opposite tree line. Same height, same impossible stillness. "There's 2 of them," I breathed. "At least 2. I think there might be more." We sat there for what felt like hours, barely breathing, watching the shadows watch us. They never moved, never made a sound. But I had the absolute certainty that they were studying us, learning our behavior patterns, figuring out how we operated. Just before dawn, they simply faded back into the forest. One moment they were there, the next they were gone. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said. "Now!" As we packed our gear, I found something that made my blood freeze. In the soft earth around our campsite were footprints. Dozens of them. The creatures had circled us multiple times during the night, coming within 20 feet of where we slept. We'd never heard a sound. The next morning brought worse news. Deputy Garcia and Officer Thompson had gone missing during their patrol of the South Trails. Their patrol car was found abandoned, with the doors open and the engine still running. No signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of what had happened to them. But 50 yards from the car, we found more of those perfect stone circles. This time there were 3 of them, arranged in a triangle. Inside each circle were pieces of the missing officers' uniforms and equipment. "It's escalating," Agent Walsh said. "The behavior is becoming more organized, more ritualistic, and it's taking more people at once. Any theories on what we're dealing with?" She was quiet for a long moment. "There are stories in Appalachian folklore about creatures that live in the deep mountains, guardians of the wilderness. Most anthropologists dismiss them as cultural myths. But? The behavioral patterns match too closely to ignore. These stories describe creatures with human-level intelligence that view humans as invaders in their territory. They're said to study people for days before acting, learning their weaknesses. That afternoon, we found Jake Morrison's statement from the hospital had been updated. The doctors said his memory was coming back. "I remembered something else," he told us. "The night before it attacked our camp. I saw it in the trees. It was watching us, but it wasn't alone. There were others with it. They were communicating somehow. Not with sounds, but with gestures, like they were planning something." "How many others?" "At least 4 or 5, maybe more. They moved through the trees like they weighed nothing, but I could see they were huge, all of them." I felt a chill run down my spine. We weren't dealing with one creature. We were dealing with a family group, or worse, an organized community. And they were hunting us systematically, picking off our people one by one. The question was, what did they want? And more importantly, how could we stop something that was smarter, stronger, and knew these mountains better than we ever would? As night fell on our 4th day in the mountains, I had the terrible feeling that we were about to find out. Agent Walsh disappeared that night. We found her tent the next morning, shredded like all the others. But this time was different. This time they'd left us a message. Her FBI badge was pinned to a tree with a stick 20 feet off the ground. Below it, carved deep into the bark, was a symbol. A crude drawing of a human figure surrounded by what looked like mountains. "It's a warning," Sarah said. "They're telling us this is their territory." Sergeant Mills called off the official search. "I'm not losing any more people to whatever's up there," he said. "We're sealing off the area and calling it a bear attack." But I couldn't let it go. 3 families were missing their loved ones. 4 of my fellow officers were gone. And somewhere up in those mountains, something was collecting human trophies like a serial killer. My detective instincts wouldn't let me walk away. That evening I made a decision that probably saved my life and definitely changed it forever. Instead of hunting this creature, I was going to let it hunt me. I went up to Sharp Top alone, carrying minimal gear and making no attempt to hide my presence. If this thing was as smart as everyone said, it would know I was coming. It would know I were as alone. And maybe, just maybe, it would get curious enough to show itself. I set up camp in the same clearing where we'd found the Morrison family's destroyed belongings. As the sun went down, I built a fire and sat beside it, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. At 9 p.m., I heard movement in the trees around me, slow, deliberate footsteps circling the clearing. Whatever was out there was big enough that I could feel its footsteps through the ground. Then I saw it. It stepped out of the tree line directly across from me, just outside the circle of firelight. 10 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, with shoulders wider than any man's. But it was the eyes that got me. Human eyes. Intelligent eyes. Eyes that studied me with the same intensity I'd used to study crime scenes. We looked at each other for what felt like forever. I forced myself not to move, not to reach for my weapon. This wasn't about fighting. This was about understanding. Slowly, deliberately, the creature walked around my campfire. It moved with impossible grace for something so large, each step placed with careful precision. As it circled me, I could smell it, a wild, musky scent mixed with something else. Something that reminded me of the evidence room back at the police station. It was the smell of fear. Human fear. When it completed its circle, the creature stopped directly in front of me. We were maybe 6 feet apart. I could see its face clearly now. Human features, but larger, older, more primitive. Its expression was curious, almost thoughtful. Then it spoke. Not words exactly, but sounds that carried meaning. Low grunts and growls that somehow conveyed intelligence, purpose. It was trying to communicate with me. I did something that went against every instinct I had. I spoke back. "I understand," I said quietly. "This is your home. We invaded it." The creature tilted its head, studying me. Then it made a sound that might have been agreement. "The people you took, are they alive?" This time the sound was definitely negative. A low growl that carried sadness, almost regret. "You didn't want to hurt them." Another affirmative sound. The creature gestured toward the mountains, then toward me, then made a pushing motion with its massive hands. It was telling me to leave. "But you'll let me go?" The creature studied me for another long moment. Then it did something that shocked me to my core. It reached out with one enormous hand and gently touched my shoulder. The touch was careful, controlled. It could have crushed my bones without effort, but it barely applied any pressure. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't a monster. It was a guardian, an ancient intelligence that had watched over these mountains for generations, and humans had finally pushed too far into its territory. The creature stepped back, looked me in the eye one last time, and nodded. Then it turned and walked back into the trees, moving with that impossible silent grace. I sat by the fire until dawn, thinking about everything I'd seen and heard. When the sun came up, I packed my gear and hiked down the mountain. I never saw the creature again, but I knew it was still up there, watching, protecting its ancient home from those who would disturb its peace. The official report listed the disappearances as bear attacks in remote wilderness area. The Peaks of Otter section was temporarily closed to camping, and new warning signs were posted about dangerous wildlife. But I knew the truth. 6 months later, I transferred to a different district. I couldn't keep working mountains where I knew something that intelligent was watching every move humans made. Sarah understood. She'd seen enough to know we'd encountered something beyond normal explanation. The missing people were never found. Their families got insurance payouts and tried to move on with their lives. Jake Morrison moved to Florida and never went camping again. Agent Walsh's disappearance was classified, and the FBI quietly closed their investigation. No other agents were assigned to the case, but I kept track of similar incidents across the Blue Ridge Mountains. Over the years, I found reports from North Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia, always the same pattern. Experienced outdoors people disappearing from remote areas, destroyed campsites, massive footprints that couldn't be explained. The creatures were still out there, still protecting their territory, still watching. 3 years after my encounter, I got a letter with no return address. Inside was a photograph of the clearing where I'd met the creature. In the center of the photo was a stone circle, perfectly arranged. Inside the circle were my old police badge and a small wooden carving, a crude figure of a man and a larger figure standing peacefully side by side. I understood the message. I had shown respect, and respect had been returned. But the carving also contained a warning. At the base were smaller figures, humans with weapons, approaching the two peaceful figures. And those smaller figures were crossed out. The message was clear. Others were welcome to try what I had tried, but they had better come in peace, or they wouldn't come back at all. I still have that carving. It sits on my desk at home, reminding me that there are places in this world where humans aren't the dominant species, places where older, smarter things make the rules. The Blue Ridge Mountains are one of those places. If you ever decide to go camping up there, remember what I learned. Show respect for the wilderness and what lives in it. Don't go where you're not wanted. And if you start to feel like you're being watched, you probably are. Some guardians have been protecting their homes for a very long time, and they're still out there, watching, waiting, making sure that balance is maintained. I learned to respect that. I hope you will, too. Because the alternative is becoming another missing person report that gets filed away and forgotten. And trust me, you don't want that to happen to you. My name is Michael Running Bear, and I've been a park ranger in the Cherokee National Forest for 14 years. People call me Mike. I'm 37 years old, and I know these mountains like the back of my hand. My grandmother always said I got my healing touch from our Cherokee blood, but I learned my real medical skills in the Army. Combat medic, 2 tours. Now I help people in the wilderness when they get hurt or lost. The Joyce Kilmer Forest is special. Ancient trees that were old when my ancestors walked these paths. Some of those tulip poplars are 400 years old, so tall you can't see their tops. The Cherokee people used to gather medicine here. Sacred plants that could heal almost anything if you knew how to use them. I never believed the old stories my grandmother told. Raven mockers, skinwalkers, things that hunt in the dark. Those are Navajo stories, I used to tell her. We're Cherokee. We don't have monsters like that. She'd just shake her head and say, "Boy, every people got their dark things. Ours just hide better." That was before April 8th, 1984, before I learned she was right. It started with a call on my radio. Dr. Patricia Adams from the university had a research permit to study traditional Cherokee medicines in the old growth section. Her team had been out there for 3 days, cataloging plants and taking samples. Now, something was wrong. "Ranger Running Bear, we need medical evacuation." Her voice crackled through the static. "My graduate students are sick, really sick. We don't know what's happening." I grabbed my medical pack and headed out in my truck. The April rain had been heavy that week, making the forest roads muddy and slick. As I drove deeper into the preserve, the trees seemed to close in overhead. Even with my headlights on, everything looked darker than usual. When I reached their camp, I knew something wasn't right. The researchers had set up near one of the old medicine circles, a ring of stones where Cherokee healers used to gather special plants. My grandmother always told me to leave tobacco and say a prayer before taking anything from those places. These folks had just moved in and started digging. Dr. Adams met me at the edge of camp. She was a tall woman with gray hair, maybe 50 years old. Looked like the kind of professor who thought she knew everything. But right now, she looked scared. "Thank God you're here," she said. "It's Jennifer and Mark. They started getting sick yesterday evening. High fever, chills. But the weird thing is," she paused, "they keep saying they feel empty inside, like something's being pulled out of them." I followed her to the largest tent. Inside, 2 young people lay in sleeping bags, and I could see right away this wasn't any normal sickness. Jennifer looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her brown hair had gray streaks that hadn't been there before. Mark's face was thin and hollow, like he hadn't eaten in weeks. I checked their vitals. Heart rate too fast, blood pressure too low, but their temperatures were normal now. That made no sense if they'd been burning up with fever. "When did the symptoms start?" I asked, pulling out my stethoscope. "Right after we started harvesting from the medicine circle," Dr. Adams said. "We found some rare plants there, ginseng, bloodroot, things that aren't supposed to grow this far south." I felt cold run down my spine. Those plants were sacred. You didn't just take them without permission. "Did you leave any offerings?" I asked. She looked at me funny. "Offerings? This is scientific research, Ranger." Jennifer opened her eyes and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was weak, like an old woman's. "Something's watching us," she whispered. "In the trees. It looks like an old man, but then it changes." Ipakti added her hand. "You're going to be okay. I'm going to get you to a hospital." But as I said it, I heard something outside, a sound like massive wings beating against the air. The tent walls flapped, but there was no wind. Dr. Adams looked at me with wide eyes. "What was that?"
I stepped outside to look. The forest was dead quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of water dripping from the ancient trees. But there, on the ground near the medicine circle, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A single black feather, bigger than any bird feather I'd ever seen, as long as my hand, and still warm to the touch. I radioed for helicopter evacuation, but the weather was getting worse. Thick clouds rolling in, making it too dangerous for aircraft. We were stuck until morning. "We'll have to treat them here," I told Dr. Adams. "Keep them warm and hydrated. Can you show me exactly what you took from the medicine circle?" She led me over to their work area. Plastic bags full of roots and leaves, all labeled with scientific names. But the plants themselves looked wrong. The ginseng roots were black and shriveled. The bloodroot petals had fallen off, leaving only bare stems. Everything they'd collected was dying, even though the same plants growing wild just a few feet away looked healthy and green. "This doesn't make sense," Dr. Adams muttered. "These were perfect specimens this morning." I knelt down by the stone circle. My grandmother had brought me here once when I was 12, taught me the proper way to gather medicine. You had to ask permission first. Leave tobacco. Take only what you needed, and always leave the first plant you found. These researchers had just taken everything they could carry. As I stood up, I saw him. An old Cherokee man standing at the edge of the trees, maybe 60 yards away. He was wearing traditional clothes, leather shirt, long hair braided with feathers. But something about him seemed off. Too tall, maybe, or too thin. "Hey!" I called out. "Sir, are you okay?" He didn't answer, just stood there watching us. Then, as I started walking toward him, he stepped backwards into the shadows between the trees and disappeared. I searched the area but found no tracks, no sign anyone had been there. The ground was soft from the rain. There should have been footprints. When I got back to camp, Jennifer was worse. She'd aged another few years just in the time I'd been gone. Her face was lined now, her hands spotted with age marks. Mark was mumbling in his sleep, words I couldn't understand. "This isn't natural," Dr. Adams said. She was a scientist, but I could hear the fear in her voice. "People don't age this fast. It's impossible." I sat down beside Jennifer's sleeping bag. "Can you tell me about the man you saw?" Her eyes fluttered open. They looked cloudy, like an old person's eyes. "He was there when we started digging," she whispered, "standing by the trees, watching. I thought he was just a local, maybe curious about what we were doing. But when I looked again, he was bigger. And his arms, they looked like wings." A chill ran through me. Wings? Dark wings, spread wide. But then I blinked and he was a man again. An old man with black eyes, eyes like a bird's. I checked her pulse. It was getting weaker. Whatever was happening to her, it was happening fast. That night I kept watch while the others slept. The forest around us was wrong. Too quiet. Too dark. Every few minutes I'd hear that sound again. Massive wings beating in the air above the canopy. But when I looked up with my flashlight, I saw nothing. Around midnight, I heard voices. Jennifer and Mark were talking, but they were asleep. The voices were different too, older, speaking words in Cherokee that I only half understood. Words about medicine and healing, and the price of taking what wasn't freely given. I shook Jennifer gently. "Wake up." She opened her eyes, but they weren't her eyes anymore. They were black, like a bird's eyes, and ancient beyond her years. "He comes for what was taken," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. "The raven mocker comes for the thieves." Then she closed her eyes and went back to normal sleep. I'd heard that name before. Raven mocker. My grandmother's stories. Cherokee witches who could turn into giant ravens and steal people's life force. Eat their souls bit by bit until nothing was left but empty skin. I thought they were just stories. As dawn started to break, I saw him again. The old man, standing closer this time. Close enough to see his face clearly. He looked like any Cherokee elder, except for his eyes. those black bird eyes that seemed to look right through me. This time, when I blinked, he didn't disappear. Instead, he raised his arms, and I swear I saw them stretch wider than any human arms should go. The sleeves of his shirt rippled like feathers in the wind. Then he opened his mouth and made a sound I'll never forget. Part human scream, part raven's cry, echoing through the trees like a call for the dead. Jennifer sat up in her sleeping bag. Her hair was completely gray now, her face lined with deep wrinkles. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "He's coming," she said, "and we can't run." By morning, Mark was gone. Not dead. Gone. His sleeping bag was empty, but there was no sign of struggle, no footprints leading away from the tent. Just gone, like he'd never been there at all. Dr. Adams was falling apart. "This is impossible," she kept saying. "People don't just vanish. There has to be a logical explanation." But Jennifer knew better. She looked like she was 70 years old now, her young face replaced by deep wrinkles and gray hair. Her hands shook as she pointed toward the medicine circle. "He took Mark during the night," she whispered. "I felt it happening, like something was being pulled out of him, piece by piece. His memories, his strength, his years. All of it feeding the raven mocker. I radioed for help again, but got only static. The radio had worked fine yesterday. Now it was dead. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Right now." We packed up camp as fast as we could. I helped Jennifer walk. She was too weak to carry anything. Dr. Adams grabbed her research notes, still trying to pretend this was some kind of disease she could study and understand. As we headed back toward the main trail, I heard it again, that sound of massive wings overhead. This time, it was followed by Mark's voice calling from somewhere in the trees. "Help me," he called. "I'm lost. I can't find my way back." Dr. Adams started toward the voice, but I grabbed her arm. "That's not Mark." "What do you mean?" "Of course it's Mark. He's lost. We have to help him." But I could tell the difference. The voice was Mark's, but the tone was wrong. Too flat, too empty, like someone trying to remember how a person was supposed to sound. "Please," the voice called again. "I'm hurt. I can't walk." Jennifer grabbed my hand with her shaking fingers. "Don't listen," she said. "That's not him anymore. The raven mocker took everything that made him Mark. Now it's just wearing his voice like a mask." We kept walking, but the voice followed us. Sometimes it was Mark calling for help. Sometimes it was my grandmother's voice telling me to come home. Once it was my own voice calling my name from the darkness between the trees. Each time, Dr. Adams wanted to go toward it. Each time, I had to pull her back. "This is insane," she said. "We're leaving a member of our team behind based on superstition and folklore." "Look at Jennifer," I said. "Look what's happening to her. Does that seem like folklore to you?" Jennifer was getting worse by the hour. Her young body was becoming ancient, like something was eating her from the inside out. She could barely walk now, leaning on me for support. "It's feeding on us," she said. "The raven mocker. It takes a little bit more each time. Our youth, our strength, our me, Maury's. Soon there won't be anything left." We were still a mile from my truck when he appeared on the trail ahead of us. The old Cherokee man standing right in our path. Up close I could see he was wrong in ways that made my eyes hurt to look at. Too tall, with arms that hung down too far. His face was human, but it moved wrong, like someone wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. "You took what was not given," he said. His voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. "Now you pay the price." Dr. Adams stepped forward. Even terrified, she was still trying to be scientific. "Who are you? What do you want?" The old man smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp. "I am the keeper of the old ways, the guardian of what grows in sacred ground. You came like all the others, taking what you pleased, giving nothing back." "We're researchers," Dr. Adams said. "We're trying to preserve traditional knowledge." "Preserve?" The old man laughed, a sound like ravens cawing.
You steal. You take our medicine to your laboratories, put our sacred plants in your books, sell our healing wisdom to make money. Always taking, never giving. His arms began to stretch wider, and I heard the sound of fabric tearing. But it wasn't fabric. It was skin, splitting open to reveal dark feathers underneath. "Run," I whispered to Dr. Adams. But it was too late. The old man's human shape was falling away like a shed skin. What emerged was something out of my worst nightmares. A raven the size of a man, with wings that blocked out the sky and eyes that burned with ancient hatred. The raven mocker opened its beak and screamed, a sound that went right through me. Jennifer collapsed, aged beyond her years, her life force flickering like a candle in the wind. That's when I remembered what my grandmother had taught me. The old ways weren't just stories. They were instructions for how to survive in a world where some things never stopped being dangerous. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small pouch of tobacco I always carried. My grandmother had given it to me when I became a ranger, told me to always have an offering ready. "Wait," I called to the creature. "I have something for you." The raven mocker paused, its massive head tilting to one side like a bird studying an insect. Its eyes, still human, still burning with ancient anger, fixed on the tobacco pouch in my hand. "You know the old ways," it said. Its voice was different now, coming from that terrible beak but somehow still sounding human. "But you came with the thieves." "I came to help," I said. "I didn't know what they were doing." The creature's laugh was like breaking glass. "They took ginseng root from the sacred circle, 7 sacred plants, each one holding the wisdom of generations. They would grind them up, study them, steal their secrets, and sell them to the highest bidder." I looked at Dr. Adams. She was backing away slowly, her face white with terror. "It's just plants," she whispered. "They're just plants." "Just plants?" The raven mocker's wings spread wider, casting shadows over all of us. Each root holds the knowledge of Cherokee healers going back centuries. Each leaf carries the prayers of grandmothers who gave their lives to preserve this wisdom, and you call them just plants. Jennifer was dying. I could see it happening. Her skin was paper thin now, her breath coming in short gasps. Whatever the raven mocker was doing to her, it was almost finished. "Take the tobacco," I said, holding out the pouch. "It's a fair offering. Let them go." The creature's head tilted the other way. "You offer me store-bought tobacco for stolen sacred medicine? You insult me, grandson of healers." My blood went cold. It knew who I was, knew my grandmother's bloodline. "Then what do you want?" "Justice," it said. "The thieves must pay the price. Their life force will feed the medicine they destroyed. Their years will restore what they took." I looked at Jennifer, barely alive now, at Dr. Adams, trembling with fear, at the empty space where Mark had been before the creature took him. "There has to be another way," I said. The raven mocker hopped closer, its talons scraping against the ground. "There is, the old agreement. One life willingly given to save the others. One who understands the true cost of healing." I knew what it was asking. My grandmother had told me this story too. The Cherokee healer who gave his own life force to save his people from a great sickness, who became the first guardian of the sacred medicines. "If I agree," I said, "you'll let them go? You'll let Jennifer live?" "If you give your healing knowledge freely, yes. Your medical training, your battlefield experience, your Cherokee blood knowledge, all of it becomes part of the sacred wisdom I guard. You become like me, keeper of the old ways and the new." Dr. Adams grabbed my arm. "Don't listen to it, Mike. It's just trying to trick you." But I could see the truth in the raven mocker's ancient eyes. This wasn't about tricks or lies. This was about balance, about respect, about the price that comes with taking sacred things without permission. And if I refuse? Then they die, and their life force feeds what they destroyed, and you watch it happen, knowing you could have saved them. Jennifer opened her eyes one last time. They were cloudy with age, but I could still see the young woman she'd been just 2 days ago. "Do it," she whispered. "Please." I closed my eyes and thought about my grandmother, about all the Cherokee healers who had walked these paths before me, about the responsibility that came with having the power to heal. "I accept," I said. The raven mocker let out a cry that shook the trees. It hopped forward and placed one massive talon on my chest. I felt something flowing out of me, my knowledge, my training, my understanding of how to heal broken bodies and wounded spirits. It hurt worse than any injury I'd ever treated. But as my knowledge flowed into the creature, I felt something else flowing back. Ancient wisdom. Cherokee medicine knowledge that had been lost for generations. The secrets of plants and healing that my grandmother had only dreamed of knowing. "You understand now," the raven mocker said. Its voice was gentler, almost sad. "The burden of the keeper. To guard what must not be lost, even if it means becoming something others fear." The pain stopped. I opened my eyes and saw Jennifer sitting up, her face young again, her gray hair returning to brown. She was confused, but alive. Dr. Adams was backing away from me now, the same fear in her eyes that she'd had for the raven mocker. "What did you do?" she asked. I looked down at my hands. They looked the same, but I could feel the difference. The weight of centuries of Cherokee medical knowledge. The responsibility to protect it from those who would exploit it. "I became what I needed to become," I said. The raven mocker was changing too, shrinking back into the form of an old Cherokee man. But now I could see what he really was. Not a monster, but a guardian. A keeper of sacred wisdom who had paid the ultimate price to protect what his people held most dear. "The agreement is sealed," he said. "You will watch over the sacred places now. You will know when thieves come, and you will stop them." He turned to Dr. Adams. "Take your student and go. Publish no papers about what you found here. Speak of this to no one. The sacred medicines will remain sacred." Dr. Adams nodded quickly, helping Jennifer to her feet. They hurried away down the trail, leaving me alone with the old guardian. "What about Mark?" I asked. The old man's face was sad. "He is with me now, part of the wisdom we guard. His knowledge helps preserve what must not be lost. In time, you will understand." Then he was gone, fading into the shadows between the trees like morning mist. I walked back to my truck alone, but I wasn't the same Mike Running Bear who had answered that emergency call 3 days ago. I could feel the change in every step, in every breath. The forest looked different now, not just trees and plants, but a living library of Cherokee medicine knowledge, stretching back centuries. When I radioed in my report, I kept it simple. Research team had gotten lost, one member still missing, suspected hypothermia and dehydration caused the medical emergency. No mention of ancient guardians or stolen life force. Who would believe it? Dr. Adams never published her research. Jennifer transferred to a different university, studying something safe like accounting. She sent me a letter once, thanking me for saving her life. She said she'd tried to remember what happened in the forest, but it was all fuzzy, like a bad dream that fades when you wake up. The missing person report for Mark went cold after 6 months, but I know where he is. I can feel him sometimes when I walk through the sacred groves. He's part of the knowledge now, part of the ancient wisdom that flows through these mountains. In a strange way, he's more alive than he ever was before. My job didn't change much on the surface. I still respond to medical emergencies, still help lost hikers and injured climbers. But now I also watch for the other kind of trouble. Researchers who come asking too many questions about traditional plants, pharmaceutical companies looking for new drugs to patent, people who see sacred Cherokee medicine as just another resource to exploit. When I find them, I try education first. I explain about respect, about asking permission, about leaving offerings. Most of them listen. The smart ones pack up and leave. The ones who don't listen, well, they meet the old guardian,
And sometimes, if their intentions are truly harmful, they become part of what they tried to steal. I've been walking this balance for 6 years now, ranger by day, guardian by night. It's lonely work, but it's necessary. The Cherokee people lost so much when we were forced from these mountains. What remains must be protected. My grandmother died 2 winters ago. In her final days, she looked at me with knowing eyes. "You met him, didn't you?" she said. "The keeper of the old medicine." I nodded. "Good," she whispered. "I was afraid the knowledge would die with my generation. Now I know it's safe." She was buried in the old Cherokee cemetery with tobacco and sage to help her journey to the Nightland. The Ravenmocker came to pay his respects, standing at the edge of the trees during the service. Only I could see him, but I felt his approval. Last month, another research team got permits for the Joyce-Kilmer Forest. They want to study ethnobotanical resources with pharmaceutical potential, corporate-funded, with plans to patent whatever they find useful. I'll be waiting for them. The old ways aren't dead. They're just sleeping, guarded by those who understand the true cost of healing. And sometimes when the wind blows through the ancient trees just right, you can hear voices in Cherokee, speaking words of medicine and wisdom that will never be written in any university textbook. Because some knowledge is too sacred to steal. Some secrets are worth becoming a monster to protect. And in the Cherokee National Forest, the Ravenmockers still keep their ancient watch, making sure the balance is maintained between the world of the living and the wisdom of the ancestors. If you ever find yourself in these mountains, remember to be respectful. Leave tobacco if you take anything, even a photograph. Ask permission before you disturb the sacred places. And if you see an old Cherokee man watching you from the tree line with eyes like a bird's and arms that might be wings, well, you'd better hope your intentions are pure, because some guardians never rest, and some prices are paid in more than money. The forest remembers everything. Total word count, approximately 4,200 words, 15 to 17-minute reading time.